Call the meeting to order. It's the meeting of March 17th, 2014. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. And we'll note that all commissioners are present. First item of business is the order of business. Mr. Colling, you have some changes?
I do, Mr. President and Commissioners. Thank you. The first item would be in addition to the consent agenda. We received today a request for a pipeline license, approval of pipeline license agreement. As you know, with our boring for the 24-inch dedicated water line of the East Side Water Distribution, we are crossing the railroad property at several locations and require a license from the railroad in order to do that. The cost of this license would be approximately $10,000. It is in similar form to the pipeline licenses that you have approved as a commission in the past. And then the other items for changes to the agenda, Mr. President, is we would request that you would remove from the agenda item 4A, a water service contract between the city, Southwest Water, and the state of North Dakota. And item 4B, the contract with J.E. Dunn for construction of the Dickinson Public Safety Center. We are still negotiating some of those items, and we'll bring those back to you at a later date, probably at the next commission meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Colling. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve the agenda, including the changes that Mr. Colling made?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. So the motion carries. Then the next item is a consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to discuss? If not, would there be a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altmans?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. We'll go to item 4C, and Mr. Kessel is going to introduce that item.
Thank you, President Johnson. We have a proclamation in front of you this evening with regard to human trafficking. This is a topic that's been in the news as of late, and we've been asked to consider approving the Freedom from Human Trafficking Day resolution. And they presented that. Would like it to be entered into the record and read this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kessel. I'll go ahead and read this then. It says it's a proclamation observing April 5th, 2014 as Freedom from Human Trafficking Day. And it goes as follows. Whereas human trafficking is modern-day slavery, that is a violation of a person's rights and dignity through the trade of human beings in sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and other forms of slavery and trafficking, and whereas human trafficking occurs when an adult, child, or infant is forcibly recruited, harbored, or transported for the purpose of forced exploitation, commercialized sexual exploitation, slavery, illicit adoption, removal of organs, and forced labor or services. And whereas human trafficking affects people all over the world, including right here in Dickinson, North Dakota, and whereas awareness of the issue and support for victims of human trafficking are essential to prevent its spread worldwide, and whereas two events are being held on April 5th, 2014 in Dickinson to bring awareness to human trafficking and help provide assistance to individuals who are being restored to freedom. Therefore, I, Mayor Johnson, declare April 5th as Freedom from Human Trafficking Day and hereby urge residents of Dickinson to increase their education on human trafficking and protect one another by recognizing potential trafficking activity and victims, and to report all suspicious activity to law enforcement. So I'm sure there are no objections by my fellow commissioners. I will gladly sign this proclamation. and date it. And then I will pass it down to the city administrator for his signature, and I believe Janelle Kohler is in the audience, and we'll ask Mr. Kessel to sign it and present it to her. And Ms. Kohler, if you just maybe step to that podium, Mr. Kessel will meet you there. And thank you for bringing this issue to our attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll move to item 4D. This is Wells Fargo Improvement Bonds Ordinance. Mr. Colling, is there anything you'd like to say about this item?
Mr. President, this ordinance is on for second reading and final passage. This is the ordinance that provides for the dedication of certain sales tax revenues to the projects that are listed in the ordinance. Since first reading, we have added a couple of projects to this list in order to make sure that we're able to take full advantage of the bond funds that will be made available to us. The projects that are listed in this ordinance are the finished water pump station, construction of 10th Avenue West, the West Side 24-inch dedicated water main, construction of 21st Street West, construction of 40th Street East, the East Side water distribution along Broadway Street, River Drive Booster Station, State Avenue Booster Station, the East Side 1 million gallon water storage tank, and the DPR Highway 10 lift station. We anticipate that most of these projects will also receive funding from other sources, including some of our oil impact money that is granted from the state or appropriated from the state. But if you approve of the ordinance, we will proceed to have the documents drafted and completed and proceed to close the loan. This is ordinance 1542, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Before we ask for public input, I'll just ask if there are any questions by city commissioners regarding the ordinance or the terms. I see the next item, if we pass this, is a resolution regarding this bond. But if you have questions about the terms of the bond, I'm sure Mr. Colling would take those now. So, Mr. Colling, it's my understanding it's a $20 million bond. It's a 10-year term. The interest rate would be set on the day of the sale, but we had some recent correspondence that you have reason to believe the interest rate will be approximately 2 3/4%.
That's correct, Mr. President. That's the latest information we have from Wells Fargo. They have indicated that bond rates are moving in our favor, so there's a chance that we may get the loan for less than that.
Okay. And then the bonds are callable, which means, I mean, if we have excess funds in any time during the next 10 years, we have the option to call them?
That's correct, Mr. President. There are two interest payment dates on the bonds. I believe it's July 1st, or June 1st and December 1st of each calendar year, and the bonds are callable on any of those payment interest dates.
Okay. Any questions or comments by commissioners?
President
Mr.
Johnson,
Kessel?
I'd just like to add that that interest rate is a fixed rate for the term of the loan.
Right. Okay, if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this proposed ordinance, it's ordinance 1542, you may come to the podium at this time and we'll hear your comments. Anyone from the public? There's no one from the public that wishes to comment on 1542. Any comments or questions by commissioners? Hearing none, is there a motion regarding the second reading and final passage of this ordinance?
Mr. President, move to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1542.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Oltmans?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. So that brings us to the resolution that I mentioned. Mr. Colling, would you like to introduce that?
Mr. President, Commissioners, this resolution provides the authority to the President of the Commission and Mr. Kessel as the City Administrator to approve of the bond documents themselves and to conduct the closing of the bond issue. We anticipate closing, assuming everything goes as planned, is going to be sometime later this month or in early April. There are four basic bond documents that the Commission President and the City Administrator will be signing. There is an indenture of trust, a continuing covenant agreement, environmental compliance agreement, and the security agreement. This resolution would allow you as President and Mr. Kessel to close the loan and approve those documents. This would be Resolution 16-2014, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Colling. You've heard his introduction. Any comments or questions for Mr. Colling?
I'll move that we approve Resolution 16, 2014.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mrs. Dukert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. The next item is another ordinance. Item F is driving without liability insurance, and Mr. Colling is going to introduce this item also.
Mr. President, this is second reading and final passage of Ordinance 1543 regarding driving without liability insurance. There is an existing offense in City Code for driving without liability insurance, and it is classified as a Class B misdemeanor. There was a recent opinion from the North Dakota Attorney General who found that due to recent changes on the last legislative session, the offense of driving without liability insurance is no longer to be classified as a Class B misdemeanor, but is instead an administrative offense, punishable with the first violation of a fine of $150 and a second violation of $300. There are no changes to this ordinance since first reading, and city staff recommend approval, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Are there any questions for Mr. Colling regarding this ordinance? If a member of the public would like to comment regarding Ordinance 1543, you may do so now. Come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody wish to comment on 1543? No comments? Would there be a motion regarding 1543?
I'll make a motion to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1543.
Second.
We have the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Dukert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So the motion carries. Brings us to item G, on-sale, off-sale liquor license. This is a resolution. Mr. Kessel, you're going to introduce this item?
Thank you, President Johnson. At a previous City Commission meeting, we introduced this item as a request, where we received a request to initiate another on- and off-sale liquor license. Per ordinance, we have to justify a population of 21,000 in order to make that occurrence possible for the City Commission. And you reserve the right, whether we prove that 21,000 or not. You have that choice whether to initiate an additional on and off sale license. Using landfill, water consumption, and building permit numbers, we were able to easily justify a population exceeding 21,000 and actually a population closer to 24,000. Our landfill, because 2010 was the last year in which we had a census completed, we gathered information with regard to the landfill, where we had a 30% increase in landfill tonnage. If you multiply the 2010 census number of 17,787 by 30%, you get a number around 23,000. We did the same thing for water consumption. That currently sits at 34% increase since 2010. So that justifies a number closer to 24,000. We did building permits, and that number justifies a number closer to 25,000. And we also did just sign up for utility accounts. That one's a little bit more tricky because as every apartment building, duplex or otherwise comes on, they only sign up as one account, but yet there's multiple living units in most of those, and that had a 20% increase in account sign-up. I didn't extrapolate that because it becomes difficult, as I mentioned, to come up with a building unit number. So, assuming that the City Commission agrees with these figures, a population of 21,000 is well within reach, surpassed maybe even 24,000. And I want to thank Mr. Corton, Mr. Zuroff, and Ms. Bresden for helping arrive at these figures. So what it means is that it's in the Commission's hands. I believe you have numbers to support 21,000, but you have to make an affirmative motion or resolution to actually initiate another license. This is a restricted class. So with that, unless there's questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Mr. Coley, is this Resolution 17 then?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. Any questions or comments by commissioners? Well, I'll make one then. If we act favorably on this, my assumption is we would not act favorably on a request to go beer only for convenience stores or beer and wine only for convenience stores. That's, I mean, if I vote yes for this, I would intend to vote no on the others, and I guess I'm curious to how everybody up here feels.
I would do the same.
Yeah.
I would agree also.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure I'm getting the direct relationship. I think the question of the beer in the C-stores is a separate issue. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of that, but I'm not sure why adding this license.
I see them as related issues, and my question to the table up here is, you know, who else sees them as related issues? And if you don't, that's fine, but I mean, I think they're related,
Well,
so.
And maybe I shouldn't have said related. Obviously, they're related.
A convenience store could bid on this license.
I
Right.
understand. Yeah.
And the minimum bid would be 185,000. Like the last one.
Well, Commissioner Dukart, that's well within your rights to establish as well. The minimum bid is something that that we can discuss and you can set. So if you would like that at 185, then that's the number we would seek. I will tell you that we have had other interest in a license such as this, so I expect that there will be multiple bidders for the, especially if the consideration to not a beer-only license is passed as well.
You know, the resolution's written with the 185,000 in it, and I think you wrote it that way because that was the minimum bid requirement when we did this about a year ago or a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, that's correct, Mr.
Yeah.
President.
And we've had one request so far for this type of license, right?
That's correct. We've had one formal request in writing for this type of license, Commissioner Dukart.
Well, regardless of the rest of the conversation, I think we should go ahead with the process and do it.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Other comments? Okay, you have the resolution in front of you. If you're inclined to do this, are you satisfied with the content of the resolution, or would there be any changes you would suggest to it? So, Mr. Colleen, maybe if we pass this, can you just go through the process again, what's going to happen once if it passes?
Yes, Mr. President, Commissioners, Process is as follows, and it's outlined in our existing city code in Article 4. Any interested parties would have until the 28th of March to submit a sealed bid that would have at least the minimum bid price. Any of those interested parties that do submit a bid would then have the opportunity at the bid opening on the 28th to increase the amount of their bid. We would essentially conduct an auction for that bid. And then the high bidder at the auction would go through the normal process that we have where our police department would do a background investigation and ensure that they are a qualified applicant for that license. If that applicant passes the necessary background check, then we would go ahead and issue the license, and that applicant would then be entitled to sell alcohol in an on-off sale environment anywhere within the city. Under our ordinance, bidders who do not currently have a space in which to sell alcohol can still be eligible for the license. They then have 12 months in which to open and operate a facility using that license in the on-off sale alcohol environment.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Anything else here by commissioners? Not, is there a motion regarding this resolution?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. We'll go to item H then. Mr. Hirschfeld, you have a request regarding the Board of Equalization meeting date?
That is correct, President Johnson, Commissioners. The North Dakota Century Code sets the second Tuesday in April as the night for the Board of Equalization meeting of cities. They also require 15 days for a notification for a change of increase. We will not be prepared for that date, even though we are running ahead of schedule compared to last year, and we are asking to move that date to the regular scheduled first meeting night in May. The past 2 years we've done that and held that at 3 o'clock ahead of the regularly scheduled meeting, and would support that if that works in your interest as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. You've heard his request. Any comments, questions? As he said, I think we've done this every year, as long as we've been on the commission. Would there be a motion to approve the date change from April 8th to May 1st and set the meeting at 3 p.m.?
May 1st or 5th?
Did I say 1st?
Yeah,
May 5th.
I'll make that motion for May 5th.
Second.
Any discussion? We'll go ahead and vote then. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. You have the financial report in your packet of information. Mrs. Johnson is no longer with the city to present it. We'll ask if Mr. Kessel has any introductory remarks that he would like to make.
Thank you, President Johnson. Again, I want to thank Ms. Bresden for putting the document together for you this evening. As President Johnson mentioned, Ms. Johnson is no longer with the city. We'll talk about that actually a little bit later in our agenda this evening. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to write them down and respond to them at a later date.
In other words, you don't know the answers?
I'm anticipating that a board this intelligent will go right over my head right away.
Are there any comments or questions? Well, I noticed on the sales tax schedule that we're off to a good start. Last year, if you recall, we started a little slow. This year, just 1 month reporting, we're up 21.5%, and of course, the numbers can be pretty erratic in those first 3 or 4 months, but it's better to start up than down. And Mr. Kessel and I were meeting just prior to this meeting, and he looked briefly at the February numbers, but his recollection was we probably started over we had a pretty strong February too. So maybe we can get you to send those numbers out to us in an email. But
I could certainly do that.
like I said, last year those first 3 months were a slow start, and then we picked up steam after that. But so I looked through the financial report. I didn't see anything that jumped out at me. And remember, this is for the first 2 months of the year. It looked like our revenues were pretty much where we would expect them to be, and our expenses all look pretty much in line for the first 2 months too. Are any city staff aware of any issues with expenses that they're concerned about after 60 days? Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Kessel to write down? Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve the report as presented to you?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote then. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. I think it's close enough to 5 o'clock for our timetable item. This is an internal report by the city, so we'll go ahead and start that. And Public Works Director Zuroff is going to make the introduction.
President Johnson and Commission, thank you. We're going to do a quick presentation on the street division. As with all the Public Works divisions, we've had increased challenges and problems, I guess you'd say, due to the growth in the community. Brent Coulter, our street division manager, will give us an update on the status of the division, along with some changes we are considering and we feel are needed. The division also has been tasked with fleet management system, and he'll touch on that and kind of talk about what we feel we need to get started with that. So, and we've had a lot of discussions, Brent and I, on what direction we need to go on a lot of this. The community's growing and changing, and so I wanted to bring this to Commission to get input on our direction. So I'll give it to Brent.
Welcome, Brent.
Good afternoon. The first slide that will come up will be our staff levels. Staffing levels are approximately 80%. The current numbers are 1 chief operator, 2 senior operators, 4 regular operators, 1 sign and striping specialist, and 2 vacant operator positions. And hopefully with the next go around, we'll be able to fill those slots as well. Along with the staffing, our training program, the current training model is still under development. It is being structured to more closely coincide with job descriptions and to better qualify current city employees for advancement. Training milestones would be as follows: 1 to 2 hours of classroom-based training per month, AASHTO and North Dakota LTAP, continuous on-the-job training, and we've also instituted an equipment operation qualification checklist. That's something that, let's see if I can get this one right. There we go. That's something that I've actually discussed with Mr. Kessel and Mr. Zuroff to get our operators in a better position to where they'll be more efficient just for us. Our equipment needs. We're still looking at this, but currently the street department is looking at replacing 4 of our existing sanders. We depend heavily on these units during the snow and ice events, but in their current condition, they just can't meet the demand. Age and maintenance costs has become a major factor in the decision to replace these units. 2 of these units are greater than 30 years old, 1 is more than 20 years old, and 1 is a converted refuse truck, right-hand drive, that is more than 15 years old. 3 of our 3/4-ton pickup trucks have also exceeded their service expectancy and are also in need of replacement. All 3 units are also high-use items. 1 would be in the street department, 1 would be in sign and striping, and 1 would be the fleet shop unit. This is something that we have actually been talking a lot about, is our annual leaf pickup. Currently, we're discussing whether or not to continue this courtesy service. The reasons for discontinuation would be, obviously, the first one is budget efficiency. The costs involve payroll, the equipment, as well as the higher cost of fuel. They now outweigh the benefit this courtesy program has offered. It's very time consuming towards that end of the year, and usually we are in a crunch to try to finish up what maintenance we have going at that time. Very labor intensive. It requires multiple operators, 3 to 4 maximum, which would be almost half the staffing right now. When I have them out during this time, this last fall, we tried to do the duration for approximately 2 weeks. That didn't work out so well. Some people were ready, some people were not, some people were ready earlier than that. Plus we got the early frost, caused a lot of problems. And when we did complete that 2-week stretch, we were still getting calls weeks after to come out and pick up leaves. Reduced efficiency of the sweeper operations. Some of these piles have gotten so large that not only do we have to have a bobcat or a loader and a truck out there, we have to actually set a sweeper on that street for multiple days just in order to pick that stuff up. Rather than do it the way that we're doing it now, I know some people depend on this service, but there might be other ways we could do it, such as maybe supply the bags, set recycling containers in certain areas. But with our staffing level being at the situation it is right now, at the level that it is, it's something that we should really take a look at. 2014 projects. Projects have been bid or in a pre-bid status for the 2014 construction season. Currently, we have approximately $2 million in seal coats divided into 5 sections throughout the city. They're expected to bid next month or possibly at the end of this month. We have $1 million in mill and overlay, currently looking at 4 locations. Those are expected to bid at the beginning of next month. The remainder of the current year's budget is to be used on full depth repairs and Durapatching throughout the city in order to extend the service life of the streets most in need. We are still working on our pavement management plan. That will also help us establish the order of maintenance to be conducted. Winter maintenance, everybody's favorite topic. With the rapid growth of the city of Dickinson, consideration should be made to reevaluate our current level of service, as well as the type of materials used in snow and ice control. The use of sand and salt and sand-salt mix causes issues such as clogged gutters and storm drains. High traffic volumes tend to blow the sand off the roadway, so multiple applications are needed throughout the day. Sand-salt mix is ineffective at temperatures below 17 degrees. Once we hit 17 degrees, the efficiencies really start to drop and it becomes noticeable throughout the city. Sand and sand-salt mix are considered last resort in all current snow and ice control plans available today. Materials that are commonly used and are the most effective for snow and ice control are road salt, salt brine, and salt brine mix. Road salt is the most effective when a pre-wet agent is used. We are recommending a GeoMelt, which is 80% salt brine and 20% beet juice. It's a product called Beet 55. Some of the benefits of the road salt and brine mixes are: 1, less material is needed. 2, it's got a smaller environmental footprint, meaning the less material you use, the less product that you have to put down, the better off you're going to be. The Beet 55, I know that's going to be one of the questions. It is beet juice. It is a beet byproduct. So it's all natural. It's effective into the sub-zero temperatures, and that's why they introduced the Beet 55 into the mix. It lowers the freezing temperature of the salt brine, and it reduces the need for snow hauling and storage. Currently, right now, there are areas in the city that we have no other choice other than to windrow it and then come through with the snow blower, fill up the trucks and haul it out. And that in itself is very labor intensive. You got an operator in each vehicle, you got an operator in each piece of equipment, and that's when we have to really depend on other departments to come in and help us out. Even if we were fully staffed, it's a difficult operation without another department's assistance. Material storage has now become an issue. We currently do not have the capability to store enough material in order to manage an average winter. The current facility that the city uses is a small steel structure located within the North Dakota Department of Transportation yard located on Highway 22. This year alone, we have run dangerously low on material due to the salt shortages throughout the country and late deliveries. A larger facility would allow us to pre-order enough material and stockpile so we would not end up in this position again. In addition to the larger material shed, a brine facility would cut down on our material costs. Current prices for geomelt delivered are approximately 91 cents a gallon, and that is purchasing off of the North Dakota Department of Transportation state bid. If we purchased our own brine machine and produced our own brine, it would allow us to mix our geomelt and brine for approximately 25 to 35 cents a gallon. Incidentally, we could also sell the same to the commercial snow removal outfits to help recover some of the costs. The current sanders that are used by the street department have exceeded their service life. They are also considered specialty equipment as they only have the capability to serve a single purpose. It is the department's recommendation that these sanders be replaced with units currently owned by the city that have been upgraded with multi-use bodies for year-round service. As these units are rotated out of service, it is the department's intention to have all incoming units be fitted with the multi-use bodies in order to increase operating efficiency and reduce maintenance costs for the city. Right now, if you look at the street department's fleet for winter maintenance, our sanders are just that. They are sanders. And when we come out of the winter months, those units are parked and they don't move. You cannot use them for anything else. With the way the new bodies are coming out, they're multi-use. You can use them year-round. You can haul hot mix, gravel, sand, salt. They have pre-wet tanks on them for brine usage. They're just all the way around. They're a much better unit, and they're coming out with stainless steel bodies. Currently, right now, 2 of our sanders that I showed to Mr. Zuroff the last time he was at our shop, the bodies are completely rusted out just because of the amount of material that's been in them. And that's due to their age also. The fleet department is still developing. We are looking at several different fleet management programs that will help us to more accurately track each unit's maintenance, fuel usage, major repairs, parts, and billing. Basically, it's a complete unit history at the push of a button. Our new facility will give us the capability to take on the service and maintenance for the majority of the city's individual departments and reduce the amount of contracted repairs. Currently, right now, the majority of our mechanics work comes out of the refuse department, and then that's followed by street and the water department. We do not do any services on the PD's vehicles, and we do not do any services on the fire department. Our new facility will give us that capability. A list of the units and equipment is being collected by all the departments right now in order to rotate out high-cost units for replacement. And the high-cost units would be the older units that have just passed their service life. Once the maintenance costs exceed the usefulness of the vehicle, it's time to rotate it out. Fuel efficiency also plays a part in that. Roadway concerns. The amount of heavy truck traffic on our streets has become a serious issue. With the weight of these larger vehicles, such as concrete, oil, water, and equipment haulers, we are seeing a large amount of cracking, rutting, and shoving in our newer roadways, as well as some of our older streets. A good example of that would be States Avenue, near Empire and Fairway. those intersections are not very old, and those were quality roadways when they were put in, but we do get a lot of heavy truck traffic on there. And the rutting is evident to anybody that drives down that road. Parking is also a major concern and affects when and if maintenance can take place at certain times for operations such as snow removal, patching, sweeping, and crack pouring. Some of the remedies under discussion, and these are just options. And we actually did the first one this winter for the first time. One, advanced public notification via the city webpage, Facebook page, and public announcements via radio and news publications. We tried that this winter for the downtown area. I don't know if I could say it was a huge success, but it did help us out quite a bit, and it helped a lot of those business owners down there. Most of them were pretty happy. Another idea is no parking in designated areas at certain times. An example would be even days of the month would be streets, odd days would be avenues from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. to assist with the street cleaning. 3, establish designated truck routes and weight limits. Currently, we defer to the North Dakota Department of Transportation's weight limits as far as spring breakup goes, and that's something that we should probably consider for our lighter built roads throughout this city. And designation of maintenance sections. What we're talking about here is, if you take a look at one of our city maps, and I should have added one into this PowerPoint, everything is divided up by section lines. What we would do is go through by each section and we would number them. That way, say we had sweeping going on in sections 1, 3, 5, and 7, we could put that announcement in the paper that for that week, those are the sections that we would be working in. Patching could be going on in 2, 4, and 6, or crack pouring in 8, 10, and 12. It's just an easier way for us to break up and keep track of exactly what's going on in every part of the city. Any questions?
I have one question, or statement, I guess. One of the problems we have is public notification when we do the snow and so on. I believe we're still in discussion with the signage people on billboard, whether we're allowing them to go electronic or so. So I think that's an avenue that if we do approve that, that's one way we can notify the public through those billboards. I don't know if we'd have to pay for that service or what. But I think it's something we have to look at. Because we've been offered space on other signs in town to notify them, and they would gladly put up when there's snow removal. So as far as the leaf and so on, I can see where the cost and the labor would be intensive. To replace that, I think you need to add 1 or 2 more of those storage bins at a place where you can drop off leaves and so on. I think they're being used. The problem is we get there and a lot of them, they're full very fast. So I don't know if that means get more bins or dump them faster and so on. But then again, it comes down to labor.
That's actually one of the options that I talked to the refuse manager about, is if we were to try that and put the recycling bins out there, we would do it in certain areas. So we would have scheduled pickups every other day to go out and empty those. And then after they've been there for a week, we'd move them into another location. Then it would be that neighborhood's turn for a week, then the next neighborhood, then the next neighborhood. We could even assist them with that in the operation of the roll-off trucks, going out and picking up these bins and hauling them in. But it's still under discussion. I mean, we don't have anything set in stone yet.
We also looked at leaf pickup, or the vacuums,
Yeah.
leaf vacuums that other cities use. That would one person could go and pick up a lot of leaves without having a crew out there because of our limited crew we have. But they're that's expensive. But maybe it could be more of the solid waste division or something that has part of that would be part of the leaf pickup, along with the roll-offs. But we're looking for input. on all this?
It is a good service, and there are some people in the community that depend on it. So to just axe it completely, I probably wouldn't go that direction. But we have to become more efficient in the way that we're doing it. Because to cut our department's resources in half for 2 or 3 weeks at a shot, just to pick up leaves, that puts a serious damper on our ability to go out and do the maintenance that we really need to get done at that time of the year.
You can still bag them, and they pick them up in the bags, too.
Yep, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we were talking about as far as setting the bins out there. If they bagged them up, you know, for those that were able, it would be easier for them to throw them in the bins that way. If not, maybe do a curbside service. But basically, when it comes to that, what we're looking for is input from everybody. What's the best option that we have here for us to become more efficient?
If they bag them and put them on the sidewalk, they eventually get baled. They don't get put into the compost section. So we encourage people to bag them and haul them out, and you know, it takes a little effort, you know, on the person, but to re-slit the bag and dump it and so on, you know, that's you know, it's something that I do all the time instead of putting them on the curb. But that's one thing we should try and encourage there.
And that does
People
help.
think that if they put them on the side that they're
Right.
getting compost, and it's not.
Commissioner Steiner, I agree. You know, I think when we go at the landfill too, we'd like to increase our composting facilities. So, yeah, if you can divert those leaves into the leaf containers versus just by the side by your container, that will go into the compost instead of into the regular landfill cell.
And that's what I've always seen as the big advantage of the vacuum, or whatever you call it. You know, from personal experience, it's really a nice service. It really is. But I can see why you guys are really troubled with it. I can really understand that. So I think it's right that you're taking a good, hard look at that.
There are pieces of equipment out there that are single operator operation, and basically it's a vacuum truck, and it has three different vacuum hoses on it. It could probably do pretty close to the same amount of work that we're doing right now and leave a lot less mess and be more efficient that way. Right now, we're paying, initial costs are going to be, one, the actual unit itself that's pulling that leaf blower. So you got fuel on both of those. You have maintenance on both of those. You have maintenance for the 2 operators, sometimes 3 operators that have to go out with it. It adds up fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So if we were able to come up, if we still wanted to keep the service where we were doing curbside pickup and we went out and purchased one particular unit just to go out and do it, that would be a one-man operation, we'd be ahead of the curve there too. We'd cut down on fuel, we'd cut down on maintenance for the equipment, and we'd cut down on payroll as far as that goes.
I know you commented that probably the vacuum truck wouldn't be your first recommendation, but I think when you think about this from a total perspective, that if we can pick up the leaves ourselves, then we can put them in the compost area, and it would save wear and tear on the landfill and actually would extend the landfill life. I think if you know, if we quit picking them up from the curb, I think probably what the majority of people would do would be to bag them and leave them curbside, and then, as one or more commissioners said, they end up in the landfill. And we have a landfill life issue that we need to be cognizant of too. So, you know, it's possible from a, you know, a total city perspective, the specialized piece of equipment might be the way to go. So I'd recommend you take a hard look at that. And I have no idea. I imagine that machine costs more than $5,000, huh?
Just
Yeah.
a tad.
Yeah,
I think so.
Is that much in diesel fuel?
yeah. But, you know, it might, for the overall perspective of the city, and it could very well be the way to go.
I
Couple
don't
of the-
have many leaves because I live on top of the hill, and my leaves all go down to Commissioner Jackson's yard, so he has to rake them.
Mine all go to Judge Haroff, so. A couple of the questions, some of the equipment towards the start of your presentation that you were suggesting we probably need. Is any of that budgeted right now? Are we talking about any purchases of that kind? That's all new funds.
The previous budget that was put in, I didn't have any input on. It was submitted, and I guess the equipment that my predecessor felt that he could get with that budget is not possible. What we did do so far is we have picked up one more truck. It's a smaller unit. It's a 1.5 ton unit. It will be outfitted with a plow and a brine body that can be removable. And then that truck will also be used during the off-season with the Durapatchers. And we're purchasing that truck for about $75,000. The current budget's $200,000.
We had, Commissioner Jackson, we had some capital outlay for trucks, or some equipment this year. Our other equipment is in good shape, our loaders, our blades, and some of the other equipment. It was just the sanders that seemed to be bad, and that's, I guess, why we're looking at maybe changing it to the salt brine too, and having multi-use. I think because the sanders were only used infrequently, that's why they were, I guess, so old. But I think this next budget, I think we'll try to include some of that in those in the budget.
What we would end up doing is, when we go to replace these trucks, currently we have trucks in our fleet that are just dump bodies only. And when we go to replace these, what I would like to do is retire these older units that we have and put new bodies on some of our existing trucks. So the initial outlay is just going to be for the body itself. We do have trucks, tandem axle trucks and single axle trucks in our fleet that are still in very good shape, and they're very good units. Problem is we can't use them year round.
Yeah.
So if we change the bodies, then we get a unit that we can use year round.
The other question I had, and maybe I misunderstood, when you were talking about the salt beet brine,
The beet juice.
at the same time you were talking about the places in town that you had to windrow and carry snow away, and I think I was hearing that they had something to do with each other. I'm not understanding that.
If we make the switch to brine and road salt, and the majority of snow and ice control now is heading to liquid-only routes. That's not to say that you do away with all your options. We would always have sand. We would always have sand mix. But the brine allows us to melt the majority of it off. It'll turn it into a liquid state. And rather than these huge windrows and these big piles that we need to haul off, we would be able to hit right away. The idea with it is, in the snow and ice control, is you want to be proactive. So if we know that a storm is coming in, we can actually go out and pre-wet all the roads. We can shoot them all, and it will dry before the storm gets here. But since the liquid is dry, it doesn't mean that the residual is left. So the residual stays on the road. So as the storm hits and the snow starts to melt, it starts to create its own brine, and it doesn't stay in a solid form very long. And if it does, and you do start to get ice, the ice isn't allowed to bond to the road. So that makes removal that much easier also. Plus the benefit is you don't have to use as much. We've thrown, I forgot the number I gave you earlier, Gary, but we threw
Thousands of tons.
yeah, thousands of tons of material this year, whether it was from concerned citizens calling for the need of sand, us going out on our regular sanding routes, or the PD responding to phone calls that they're getting for the need for sand.
So do you also end up having a lesser cleanup in the spring this time of year?
Yes. If you go out and look at our roads right now, they almost look like dirt roads from the amount of the material left over from this winter. This winter was kind of strange because the temperatures were so low. And with the temperature staying that low, we have to throw more sand.
Yeah.
And then come springtime and during the summer, our sweepers will be running the entire time. They won't shut down. So you'll get less cleanup there too.
Well, I would encourage you to, when it comes to the equipment here, put together your recommendations on what you think we should be doing and get it to us much earlier than budget time. Don't wait until August. So we have a pretty good idea of what your priorities are, what the magnitude of the cost is. You know, Mr. Kessel and I have already met with some of our local legislators. We both have met with either the governor or the governor's office, talked about what we think our funding needs will be 2 years beyond where we're at, because, you know, the state does their funding 2 years at a shot with a biennium. So whether it's street equipment or what you see for needs, don't wait until the normal budget cycle. You can put together a PowerPoint, a memo, and bring it to us. So we have a pretty good feeling of what's coming on our major equipment requests and major projects. We're already doing a good job, I think, with a lot of the capital projects. But like I said, we're already talking to legislative leaders and the executive branch and saying, here's what we think we're going to need for the biennium that will end in 2017. So,
Thank you, President Johnson.
and I think, the deal of, I know there are issues with leaves, there are issues with the city picking up solid waste that's outside of the containers. But again, I go back to, time and time again, our city is complimented on how clean it looks. And even, we've had some real rapid growth, a lot of construction. We got construction waste materials that blow around. And even with all that, our city still looks pretty good. And I think a lot of this has to do with practices that aren't so common in other cities. And, I think I, for one, would like to see us maintain as much of that as we can for the cleanliness. And if there's better technology out there, by all means, bring that to us so we get ourselves educated and we get a chance to consider it. And, I'm sure, Mr. Kohler, from your presentation here, all 5 of us will hear comments from the public in the next couple of weeks. They'll weigh in and tell us, what they're thinking too. So, Mr. Jackson.
I really agree with those comments, which brings me to a current situation. We've been talking for some months about all the construction this summer. That means we're going to have a lot of dirt and mud on the streets. It's inevitable. It's going to happen, and everybody should understand that. Are we going to be able to run street sweepers more than we maybe would?
Well, I think we'll have to. Also, we'll have. I think we're going to be out more looking at the SWIP plans, the stormwater pollution plans too. This year, a lot more than we did last year, making sure that all the construction sites meet that. And Brett and I have talked a lot about maybe starting earlier for some sweepers, especially commercials, starting real early in the morning, changing some shifts around, maybe having double shifts for sweepers. So, yeah, I mean, you can already see a lot of the dirt build up on the streets, like Brent said. So, yeah. I think we're looking at maybe trying to increase the time that they're out there.
Good.
I've actually sat down with my chief operator and both of my seniors, and as well as sitting down with Gary, and we were anticipating all 3 of our sweepers running full time till we go into next winter. With the amount of stuff that we do have going on in this city as far as construction and just our regular everyday maintenance, I don't see how we can shut them down. I think they're going to have to run continuously.
I think with the spring coming here, we need to encourage the contractors to clean up their areas right now. You drive up by some of those large apartment buildings on State and 21st and so on. I mean, there's just garbage all over the place there. And that's not the only place. It's all over. Now that spring, they need to get it cleaned up. A lot of the barriers that they put up to catch the blowing dirt and everything, those are down. And that goes all the way to the west side of the city that's under development now. As you mentioned on the road there. I think we need to get them to take a good look at it and see what they can do to help clean it up also. Excuse me. I don't know how that got on there.
Any more questions?
They didn't tell me I was wrong, so.
No, no, good comments, Mr. Steiner, and better have your wife not call you when you're working, okay? Any other questions or comments here? It's a good presentation, and why don't you have those slides emailed to us as commissioners? I think that'd be a good one for us to have if we want to print them out or store them. Okay,
I can do that.
thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Gary?
I was saying thanks to Brent.
Oh, thanks, okay. Okay, well, then we're going to go to item 4J, and that's to hear the city administrator's reports. Oh, we're going to start with the hiring journal. Okay, Mrs. Nominack.
Good evening, Mr. President, Commissioners. As you will see at the top of my hiring journal, police officer is at the top. We have 2 pending offers out there right now for police officer, and we did just open the position again. So we'll have 1 more to fill if those go through. We do have a patrol sergeant that we have posted internally. And that's all right now for the police department. As you probably know, there has been an offer extended for library director. Sanitation supervisor, we're still kind of holding off on that, looking at redoing some of the positions out there. So that has not been advertised at this time. Sanitation, pretty much all the public works positions have been real difficult to fill lately. Sanitation laborer, we've had open several times. We've not had a lot of luck. We did just recently have a hire for a laborer. However, we opened a sanitation operator. We had 3 positions open there, and we did move one of our internal candidates from laborer to operator. So now we have another laborer position open, and we have 2 sanitation operator positions open. Not seeing a lot of applicants come through at all for any of those positions. Street, we last time I talked to you, I told you that we took 1.5 operator positions and made it into a senior street position, trying to get someone with a little bit more experience. We had that open twice and saw no applicants. So we've gone back to advertising for street operator. So now we've got 2 openings for street operators, and that's currently open at this time. Water utility operator, kind of the same thing. We've had 1 open. It's just a recent opening, and it's a new position for this year, and we've not had any luck yet filling that water operator position. We did hire a senior water, actually 2 senior water operators. They were internal positions, so those were just recently filled within the department. We have advertised for the chief wastewater plant operator. That won't need to be filled for a while, but we anticipate taking a little bit of time to get that position filled. So we've got that advertised. Custodian position for the Public Works facility, we've had a little difficulty trying to fill. So we've got that open again. Seeing lots of applicants though come through on that one, so that's good to see. Engineering technician is basically a line locator position. We've had this open 3 times now. I've just reopened it and not seeing any applicants on that either. But we'll try again. It's getting to be spring, so maybe we'll see more applicants coming through. Property appraiser, Mr. Hirschfeld talked a little bit about some of the positions that he had open for property appraisers, and he was looking for someone with experience. We had the position opened, and we had one applicant that had real nice experience, but couldn't convince his wife to move to North Dakota, so we'll advertise again for that. And then we have an administrative assistant position for community development that just recently opened up. So lots open right now. I probably got 7 or 8 of them right now that I have open, taking applications for.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's getting any better, does it?
Unfortunately, I can't say that it is. You know, certain positions, administrative assistant, I'm seeing lots of applicants. I think we'll have good luck with that one. The operator positions are a little more difficult to fill still.
Mrs. Nelmer, can you walk me through this procedure? When you put the job opening out there, what is the deadline for the applicants?
You know, I kind of work with the supervisor. Most of the time we give it a 2-week deadline. Some of the higher, you know, the harder to fill positions like the chief wastewater plant operator, we know that's going to take the right person with the right skill set, so we've opened that one a little bit longer, probably a month. The same thing with the property appraiser. We've left that open a little bit longer, but typically we open them for 2 weeks.
Okay, and then when you close it and you interview, from the interviews till you make the job offer, how much time is there?
It depends if we have to score the position. If we get more than 7 qualified applicants, then we have to score the position to determine who will get an interview, and the top 7 get the interview. Lately, we aren't getting that many applicants to even score, so we can hold interviews within a week of the position closing.
That was the reason I'm asking is because if I was actively seeking a job, I wouldn't be waiting around for someone to make me an offer. I would probably take the first offer, or either a location that I chose over waiting to see if this was going to be, if I was going to be hired or not. So I'm wondering sometimes if we're not waiting too long to offer the job.
Actually, we've done a lot of work with our Civil Service Commission, and we've really streamlined that process to shorten that time frame up. So I'm not having to go to them first to get the approval to do the interviews. So that really isn't where our issue is. I think what I'm seeing more is people are declining before we even get to the interview stage.
Because of salary?
You know, they don't always tell me. Sometimes it is because the salary, you know, a lot of them are applying from out of state, and they really don't have any intention of moving here. This is the biggest thing I'm seeing. Or they see how much housing costs and realize that they can't probably afford the housing costs.
Well, according to the building permits, we're going to be seeing a lot more housing coming on. So.
Right. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kessel, I think everything else under reports is yours, so why don't you just go ahead and run through them.
Okay, thank you, President Johnson. Commission, the first item is the oil and gas tax revenue distribution. I believe at the last commission meeting we handed out some handouts prior to my departure. I'm not going to belabor those unless there's questions with regard to those handouts. They were simply for your information so that you understood how the 5% and 6.5% tax, or 6% taxes are distributed. That is going to be a major point of discussion at this next legislative session, and so I want to make sure that we're completely aware of what current policy is. I'd like to combine the next 2 items, the first being the State Water Commission funding and the capital improvements plan. I have handed out for you this evening a revision to our capital improvements plan. You've seen a variety of these documents in the past, and I think as was stated by President Johnson in the past, they are a living document. I just want to point out some of the changes that are on this one particularly. The first is the prioritization column. You'll notice that all projects for 2014 are now prioritized. We had a subset of approximately 9 projects that had not been prioritized in the past. They are now all prioritized in 2014. And that list did shift a little bit, not a lot, but there were a couple that did change locations. So if you're interested in a particular item, you might want to find that item in particular. The next thing I wanted to add is the column entitled Water Commission. We were very pleased to receive the announcement that the State Water Commission will be providing the City of Dickinson up to $18.4 million for potable water projects. They are following a policy that will reimburse us for 35% of the engineering costs. That is both in design and in construction management, and up to 60% of the construction costs. You'll notice that those projects are in blue, and the amount that we expect to receive for each of those projects, which that they provided funding for, are indicated under the Water Commission column. So we're very excited to receive those kinds of dollars. I actually wrote out personal thank you notes to all the members of the State Water Commission this morning and sent those off. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the next columns are municipal debt. These are not all complete. They are proposals. The exception to that, of course, is the West River Community Center. That bond is passed. This evening, the Wells Fargo passed as well. The SRF is also, at least the first 2 projects is passed. The remaining items that you see there are not. They've been applied for, but we haven't officially received notice that they will finance those. All indications are that they will. The next 2 items are 2 columns of infrastructure that have been extended to us that we have yet to formally approve or partake in. And then the last is a column titled Special Improvement District. And as you're aware, we have to have the funding in place for those districts, and then the Special Improvement District, again, is just another way to fund or receive our funds back over the course of time. Please, I did not have the opportunity to change the formulas as I changed the format, so please don't pay that particularly close attention to the running debt total on this document, because you'll notice that some of our 2014 projects are starting to slide into 2015 projects, and we've added some projects in 2015. This is not an all-inclusive list, but we are starting to compile those projects for 15 to make sure that we are prepared not only for the legislative session, but also so that we can get the engineering complete this year, so that we're prepared for a 2015 construction season. And then you'll also notice that we pulled out the completed projects, and I'll be indicating those in a separate column as well. So the formatting has changed a little bit. We're trying to provide you as good of information as we can in a way that is easily understood. So hopefully those improvements we've made meet with your approval, and if you have any particular questions, I'll try to answer those now. I know it's a lot of information to take in.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Are there any comments or questions regarding the current capital infrastructure improvement plan?
I have one. There is a lot of information here, but one thing is jumping out at me a little bit. Project number 31, our exit 56. We are showing possibility of a local share there, but I presume that's not a commitment as of today.
Correct, Mr. Jackson. We're hoping that that number that we're carrying there of $5 million will result in no more than a $1 million local share commitment, and that we'll be able to have $4 million be approved from other entities. I did meet with the county They are willing to special assess properties in that area for up to $2 million immediately surrounding exit 56. And then we have a plan to approach 2 other entities in that area as well. And one of those commitments, or excuse me, one of those communications has happened, the other one has not. So we're getting closer, but we're hoping to drop that number from 5 to 1.
I'm not sure I'll be able to support anything from the city, just so you know.
If there's any other questions, I'll move on to the next issue, and that is staffing issues. You heard a report from HR Coordinator Namanak, and hiring remains difficult. You also heard this evening on a couple different occasions that we are in need of filling a finance director position. I met today with President Johnson to discuss this very position, and I believe that our mutual conclusion is that we should focus more attention on financial analysis and a few other job duties that were not included in the finance director position, and elevate this position to a deputy city administrator for finance and administrative services. Our hope is that in doing so, this commission and the staff will be able to receive documents, analysis, and so forth that better serve the future expectations of the city. Creating a document similar to this, only on the financing side, would be something that could be done. Also, the current environment, hiring environment, the wage that this type of position would command, I think we would fall in line, I hope, with attracting someone. We can bring a draft of a job description to you, but I expect that the difference between a finance director and a deputy city administrator for finance and admin services would probably mean an additional $10,000 a year from a staffing perspective. I believe that's well worth it in terms of what we would get from that type of position, but I wanted to bring that to the Commission's attention and receive any feedback that you may have. We have not added staff in the accounting department, even though we have in virtually every other department and multiple times. So the addition of a staff accountant may also be required to deal with the ongoing and increased issues that they're receiving as well. We'll refine these issues and bring them to you, but I'd like to get any feedback that you may have with a presentation such as that.
I spent quite a bit of time last week studying the finance director's job description, and also thinking about what the city's needs are regarding finance and accounting in general, and administrative services. And you know, if you think about finance and accounting and break it down into its various functions that we really need to deal with, I mean, you have the accounting part of it, getting the debits and credits and the right accounts correct. And then you have reporting, which is not only reporting, say, to the city commission, but there are other reports. You have financial analysis, and that could be explaining what is happening today or what appears it will happen, you know, 3 months, 6 months, a couple years from now. Then you have budgeting, which includes both the operating budgets and the capital budgets. Generally, we've been doing those for 1 year at a time, but really we probably need to do that for 2 or 3 year projections in more detail. You have the treasury functions, and many times we don't think about the treasury functions, but they're your things like your cash management, all your banking fund functions, and finance, working with the various financial entities on how to finance the city, whether it's through bonding, a short-term line of credit, equipment loans, whatever it might be. And then, we still have an employee pension and retirement plans, and those need administration on a day-to-day basis, where you interface with the groups that manage those or the actuarial groups, consultants. And then we have quite a bit of government reporting and compliance, both on the state level and the federal level, that I think should really fall into this position too. And then you have risk management, which includes, all the city's insurances and other risks that we face. So it's really I think a big job, and I think we have room in our city now for a very senior level executive position that is responsible for this. One of the things that I think we should consider adding here in terms of oversight responsibilities are the cultural departments that the city has, the museum, the library. We've had some discussion amongst us about even having a cultural affairs officer, since we're seeing, many different people coming here with different cultural backgrounds. So I think as I thought about this, I thought, I think we need an executive level position and then an accounting position, a staff accountant, who that position wouldn't have supervisory responsibilities, but would be responsible for the day-to-day accounting and probably reporting. I would see the position as requiring a graduate accountant, but anywhere from a new graduate to 3 or 4 years experience could likely fill that position. So I mean, those I think are some things for you to think about, but we do need to decide fairly soon and start the job search to replace our finance director position. I would point out that I had an opportunity to meet with the governor since our last meeting, and the governor and the lieutenant governor and a couple of members of his executive staff. They wanted to know kind of an update where we were in terms of our capital needs, our oil impact funding needs, what impact the $18.4 million from the water people had on the city, and I took them through that, and I guess I'd have a couple of comments. Essentially, what the $18 million allows us to do, in my view, is we can go ahead and commit to engineering the high priority projects that we know we're going to want to build in 2015. And to get those built in 2015, we have to get them engineered and ready for bid yet this year. And that will take, I'm just guessing, but I'm going to say at least about $10 million to do those. And Mr. Kubas will probably figure that out at a later date, just how close that guess is. But I think we can do that now. That'll allow us to keep moving forward on our development and not wait for the end of the legislature when they meet in their 2015 session. And the other thing that came through loud and clear from the governor's office is they essentially said Dickinson really has its act together when it comes to planning, and the spreadsheet that Mr. Kessel keeps and has been presenting to us periodically is really kind of the core centerpiece of what they were referring to, that we just don't come in with a number that's just kind of a general number. for needs. We have specific projects behind that you can see what they are. They're broke out, maybe what their engineering costs are, what we believe their construction costs are, what the city share is, if there's another party sharing in that, that's isolated, how we intend to finance them. And we go all through this. And we can actually take what I do for them is I take Mr. Kessel's work and summarize it into maybe a more readable document and say, here's what we need, here's what we're doing with this money. But anyway, it's well thought out. And I think we ended up receiving more monies than what they thought we would receive from the water group because of how well planned and well thought out that was. So for these next few years, I think it's really important that we're structured in a way that Mr. Kessel spends quite a bit of his time outside the city limits working with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the various funding groups that are out there. It's extremely important, and we have no way of knowing on that $18 million how much more we receive, but I suspect it could have been anywhere from $2 to $8 million more than what they kind of thought we would be allocated, but got on the basis of our presentations. So I think it's important that we, at least for the foreseeable future, that we can kind of keep him free enough to do that. But to do that, I think we need this other executive position and for your consideration. And hopefully at our next meeting, or even before our next meeting, you'll be able to send out a draft or a proposal on a job description so the other commissioners can consider that.
Thank you, President Johnson. I'll certainly send that out. And I just want to say, although I'm the keeper of the spreadsheet, Mr. Zuroff, Mr. Kubis, Ms. Marshik, and Mr. Kohling have all had a great deal of input in regards to it, and many others. So it's certainly a community effort when it comes to a document this detailed. The last couple things I wanted to mention this evening is the need, again, on the staffing side, GIS coordination. If you recall, in our budget for 2014, we chose to go with project managers instead of GIS. We kind of sacrificed GIS in that regard. We are seeing the need for GIS rear its ugly head. We've had, and we can probably document a lot of dollars we're spending now that we could have probably avoided if we had accurate records that a GIS coordinator could provide us. And I'm not sure, Mr. Zuroff could probably tell you better than I, but we've had multiple line breaks due to boring, and we're going to have at least 10 different boring crews in our community this summer. And so it's something we're very concerned about, that we'll have many, many more water and or sewer line breaks due to either inaccurate line drawings or GIS. So, Mr. Zuroff, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just would agree with you, Mr. Kessel. Last year, I believe in 2 weeks, we had 2 or 3 service lines, a water main, and a sewer force main hit. And a couple of those were marked correctly. Some of the sewer force main and others were not. If they're not located correctly or the city didn't locate them, they're, of course, our responsibility to fix. In that one in particular, in the sewer force main, we had multiple staff there almost a day and a lot of cleanup. So just that one error in itself cost the city quite a bit of money, plus discharge into the Hart River. I think we've had other issues also with fire, hitting gas lines, other things like that, that maybe our GIS wouldn't necessarily locate, but we need to get that information in our maps.
Thank you. And the last thing that I want to mention is we have a great deal of projects going on this summer, and we're very concerned about communicating where those projects are going to be taking place to the public. So we have entertained 2 different offers so far with regard to public information proposals. We will hopefully be bringing to this commission a proposal to pay for an outside firm to notify the public on a proactive basis, on a regular basis, on a multitude of resources from social media to more traditional media such as radio and TV. But we're going to use as many avenues as we can to inform the public about what's going on, what streets, what areas of the community to avoid in terms of driving. And so we hope to engage them probably at our next commission meeting. We'll bring that to you. And our thought in regards to paying for it, because it isn't cheap, is that we would simply add a certain amount to each of these projects so that when they are bid, there'll be a line item for public information so that it'll all get financed in that way. I don't particularly see the need for a long-term public information officer, at least on a full-time basis. So we thought this would be the best way to provide a full-time PIO for the short term that it would be required for this very, very intensive construction season. So we'll bring more to you at the next commission meeting. And then the last item that I have is election information. We have several positions that are up for election this year, including 2 seats on this city commission. There's also a municipal judge, a Southwest Water Authority commission member, and a couple of members from the park board that are all up for re-election or election. It does require 300 signatures, except for Southwest Water Authority. That one requires 276. If anybody is interested, you have to be 18 years old. You have to be a resident inside the Dickinson city limits for at least 30 days to be eligible to run. The only exception for that may be the Southwest Water Authority position. They may have a different residency requirement than we do as a city. If you are interested, you have to turn in your petitions by 4 p.m. on April 7th for any of these positions. And at 4:15, we'll be doing a ballot order draw, assuming that we'll have multiple people trying to become commission members. So when they're listed on the ballot, we have to determine who's first, who's second, who's third. So we do a draw, and we'll hold that at 4:15 on April 7th. So we have a lot of this information on our website. Rita Binstock here in the city administrator's office can also help. If you call her directly, she'll be happy to help you with the election information that you desire. And with that, that concludes my report for this evening.
You had a liquor license down here, which I think pertains to liquor licenses outside the city limits in the county. Did you want to say anything there?
Thank you, President Johnson. I missed that one. I'm very glad that you brought that up. One of my ongoing concerns is, as you've heard this evening, liquor licenses within our city limits are becoming quite a lot of interested parties, put it that way. And we have a great deal of growth going on in our community. I did discuss this issue with the county commission, and they currently have to follow state law. They are not a home rule county, so they don't have any choice in that matter. What that means is somebody can buy a liquor license, a county-issued liquor license, on the very edge of the city limits for $1,000. They come to the city of Dickinson, maybe they have a preliminary plat already at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and upon final plat approval, they could then, our ordinance requires us to recognize that county-issued liquor license as a city-issued license upon annexation. And depending on the type of license issued, as you heard this evening, our minimum price for an on and off sale with that limited license is $185,000. I'm not sure that it does our current liquor license holders any justice to have someone buy a $1,000 county liquor license, be annexed into the city, and forced to recognize that license. I think that's unfair. Unfortunately, the county can't do anything about it, but we can. It is up to you if you want to change our current ordinance and eliminate that clause that says we have to recognize a county-issued liquor license. I would defer to Attorney Colling in terms of the language, if you guys are interested, but it'd certainly be my recommendation that we change our existing ordinance so that we are not forced into recognizing a county-issued liquor license upon annexation. So we'd like to hear your input.
Any reaction?
Could make for some interesting annexation proceedings.
Well, and it's not unprecedented. When you look back at the Queen City Evil Olive license, and when we had to work through that issue, that became an issue for us because it had been a county license that came on as a city license, and then we had the cleanup on that. And so I think we would want to make the transition, more clear, more concrete moving forward, so that, the system isn't gamed to buy a $1,000 license and convert it to a $185,000 license.
I would agree. I don't think, if we're going to make money on allowing another license and people to bid on that, why would we allow someone to come in that only had to pay $1,000? That would definitely not be fair.
I agree. I'd like to see you bring an ordinance for first reading to our next meeting.
Mr. Cole, you comfortable legally about this?
Commissioner Jackson, the licenses that the city issues, they're not entitlements. Applicants are not entitled to issuance or to renewal of those licenses. I do think there are some property rights issues that we would have to work out in the annexation process, and also with the county as we try to coordinate government services with them. Legally, it can be done, and I think we'll need to craft the appropriate language to make sure that it works. But that is something that we can go down the process of doing.
I mean, I agree with the spirit of what we're trying to do. But in essence, if we were to annex somebody like that, we're telling them to close their doors, essentially.
Are we telling them to close their doors, or we're telling them that they need to apply for a city license? Would we have some variance in there where we would make a city license available, but it's at full city license value?
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm kind of going.
Mm-hmm. I think we'd
In
have
other
to make
words-
a contingency for that. You can't have them close their doors just because they got annexed in, but they can't convert a $1,000 license to a full city. There has to be a fee associated with it.
And the only license that that would even come close to an issue of closing their doors would be the ones that we limit. We only limit one class. If it's a restaurant, those licenses are unlimited inside our city limits. Our fee is around $3,000, I believe. So it's not as big an issue. It's mainly our limited class that we're really talking about.
But that would be an important one to have all contingencies for, because if you had a full-board nightclub with the full license and they got annexed into the city, you wouldn't want, you couldn't limit it. You have to have a contingency plan for it.
And we don't have that problem right now. We need to,
Get ahead
Yeah.
of it, yeah.
right, we need to take care of it before it starts.
That's why I'm bringing it to you now. Yeah, I believe that as proactive as we can be with a policy that we can then share with the county, they can then use that in their planning and zoning procedures so that awareness at a minimum can be provided as they're approached for licenses.
Well, I think what Mr. Kessel and Mr. Colling have heard is that there's a general consensus that, as Mr. Jackson said, agree with the spirit. I think it's up to Mr. Colling then to kind of wrestle with these legal issues and see if you can come back with a proposal to us. You know, I think the concerns pointed out in this brief discussion are good and valid. It's probably going to take some work on your part. So.
I just get to raise the sticky issues. You get to solve them, I guess.
Well, it's better to fix it before it happens.
Right. Okay. So you're done with your reports then?
I am, thank you.
All right, we're going to go to public safety. And so we have under tab 5, the fire department. Chief Sivak is going to introduce the 2012 International Fire Code with amendments. This is in the form of an ordinance. So, Mr. Sivak.
President Johnson, Commissioners, tonight we have before you for second reading and final passage the 2012 International Fire Code with the amendments necessary to have it mesh with the building code as adopted by the City of Dickinson. And at this time, what we have before you also changes the wording of our first reading submittal to reflect the wording of the 2009 code that allowed the retail sale of fireworks within city limits. So the proposal before you tonight would keep that the retail sale of fireworks in city limits is still in place.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sivak. Mr. Colon, do you have anything else to add to that introduction?
Mr. President, Commissioners, there was a hard copy of the ordinance that was placed at your desks this evening. Mr. Sivak had noted a couple of references in the electronic copy that was provided to you that still referenced the 2009 International Fire Code. So the hard copy before you is the correct version and what we would ask that you take action on tonight. As Mr. Sivak said, as adopted in this ordinance in this second reading, there would be no changes to the sale of retail fireworks within the city limits as has existed for the past couple of years.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Colling. Are there any comments or questions from city commissioners? If not, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on ordinance number 1544? If so, you come to the podium at this time, state your name, and we'd hear your comments.
Commissioners, Mr. President, my name is Kyle Thiel. I'm the owner of Dakota Fireworks. We have a location on West Villard and East Villard, and I'm asking you to, pass ordinance number 1544. I think I stated kind of our position at first reading, and I'd be happy if you should have any more questions. I'm here to help you out with them.
Thank you, Mr. Thiel. Are there any comments or questions for him? Okay, he stated he's in favor of the ordinance as it's now written. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to comment? There's no one else from the public. Any other comments by city commissioners? Is there a motion regarding second reading and final passage of ordinance 1544?
Motion to
President.
approve.
I'll second.
And we have the second by Mr. Steiner. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote then. Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sivak. We'll go to tab 6, engineering, and this is another ordinance. It's called the Chapter 34 Amendments. And Mr. Kubas, anything you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Thank you, President Johnson. Commissioners, this is the second reading of ordinance 1545 to amend Chapter 34 with respect to how we collect engineering review fees. Currently, the developer or the applicant elects to pay for engineering review by just simply checking a box on their application. These fees are then collected at the issuance of the building permit or upon plan or plat approval. The proposed changes would ask that the developer pay those fees up front when they submit their plans or plats for city review. This would help out in some of the accounting internally within the city. The cost would be estimated by the engineer based on the review time and a revised rate schedule, which we are working on. We're also looking at revising that rate schedule to reflect the actual cost of some of the permitting that we do and the inspection associated with the permitting. I think there's also some changes in Section 34 in regards to the ETZ. Is that correct? We're removing some portion of the ETZ about improvements within the ETZ, as that's now under the county's inspection, so.
All right, you've heard Mr. Kubas's introduction. Mr. Colling, do you have anything else to say?
No, Mr. President, I don't.
Okay. Any comments or questions by city commissioners? If a member of the public would like to comment on this proposed ordinance 1545, you may do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anyone from the public? There's no one from the public. Would there be a motion regarding this ordinance?
I'll make a motion to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1545.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Olman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We'll go to item B. These are development plan reviews regarding the firm Civil Service, and Ms. Loretta Marshak will comment on these and introduce them.
Good evening, President Johnson, members of the commission. This agreement would continue our arrangement that we currently have with Civil Science Infrastructure Incorporated to provide municipal engineering services, specifically development plan reviews. These services are typically initiated by the city staff, providing quality assurance reviews on plans, reports submitted to the city for proposed development, mostly civil construction plans. The city staff recommends the approval. Do you have any questions on this item?
Can you comment on the cost, the charges for these services?
In their agreement, we have a 3.0 multiplier based on their actual hourly fee.
And
that varies by whoever is doing the reviews. So if it's something that's maybe simpler in nature, they typically have a technician or a entry-level engineer that does some of the review. For some of the items that has maybe a bigger issue or gets a little more complicated, then the hourly wage is higher and they have a higher level engineer that comes on board to do those reviews.
Is that typical of the rates that we pay for professional services like
Yeah,
this?
that's the same fee that we have done with Apex on their review services. So the agreement is pretty similar in
Okay,
nature.
thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I think you just answered it indirectly, Ms. Marshak, but we have two firms that are doing this development plan review, correct?
Correct.
So you can choose which firm you think fits the project or has the capacity, or...
Typically, the city staff, I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but the city staff picks which firm, and a lot of times Apex will get projects that they've maybe already been involved with because of the sewer studies. So we kind of try and look at that way. If they've already had some involvement in an indirect way, so they're already aware of the project or have a better understanding,
Sure.
maybe going into it, we try and pick that firm.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Would there be a motion regarding this contract?
Make the motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Now, we're going to go into engineering project updates, but I believe both engineering and public works are going to combine their updates into one report here.
We are, President Johnson.
Okay.
I'm hoping I could jump forward to report number 2 on the engineering, and then we can do all the project updates together.
Absolutely. Engineers get a wide latitude at
Thank you.
this table, so. Not city planners, just engineers.
We've been in contact with the Dickinson Public Schools. There used to be gates that were closed in between Hagen and Berg for many, many years, and they've recently requested that these gates be reinstalled. With the way they had structured classes several years ago, they found they didn't need the gates. City staff had removed them, and we still retain those gates. They're in our Public Works yard right now. With some of the class jockeying that they've had to do now, they find a lot of students are walking between the 2 schools again. Next year, they anticipate 450 students a day will be walking between the 2 schools at various times throughout the day. So what they've asked of the city is that they be allowed to reinstall the gates next year, or sometime as soon as the weather allows this year. Right now, like I said, we own the gates. Dickinson Public Schools has agreed to assume all the costs with the reinstallation of the gates. They would be the operator of the gates. It's closed only between 8:40 and 2:40 approximately on school days, where their staff would close the gates and then open them back up so parents, when they're coming to school in the evening and in the morning, would be able to pick up their children. So we visited with this on this issue with city staff, and city staff recommends approval. Are there any questions or comments that the commission has?
Any objections to doing this? Does it require a formal motion by us? Mr. Colling?
Mr. President, it is just a report. Unless there's any opposition, I think city staff will proceed in that direction. There is no formal action that would be required of you.
Is there any objection then? Well, I think you have our blessing to go ahead.
Okay. Well, we're going to jump into some project updates, and we hope we have a graphic for you this evening that will help paint a good picture of the work that we have coming up. Some of this has already been touched on in Mr. Kessel's CIP spreadsheet, and we'll get into those projects as well. What I'm going to start off with, and I'll be followed up by Ms. Marshak and Mr. Zerhoff with some of the CIP projects, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of some of the development projects that we have going with upcoming subdivisions. And all these subdivisions are in various orders of development. Some of them have final plat approval, some of them are just coming with sketch plats, but I would say it's safe to say that most of them have some build out planned in 2014. And so while I'm not going in any particular order, I just hope to be able to traverse the city here in some orderly fashion. The first subdivision is called Woodhaven, and it's an R1, a residential development with 88 lots. This is on 21st Street East, just east of 10th Avenue East. The next subdivision is the Lamont subdivision. This one has actually been ongoing in the city for quite a while. This is the Hampton Inn on 14th Street. This would be all the property kind of to the north of the Hampton Inn. There's one piece that's been pulled out of that subdivision, but this is mainly a commercial but mixed use. I think there's one hotel that's proposed in here right now. The next subdivision is the Washington 5th subdivision. This had probably come before Planning Commission last year sometime as the Creekside subdivision. This is a somewhat pared down version of that. The Washington 5th subdivision is mainly residential with right now as it's proposed 32 R1 lots and 7 R2 lots. The next subdivision is just to the south. It's called the Buffalo Bend subdivision. It's an open area on 10th Avenue East, just on the west side of 10th Avenue East. This subdivision would be all residential with 11 R1 lots. Another residential subdivision is called Riverfront Estates. Again, mostly residential. I lost my mouse here. The piece right to the northerly tip here would be a commercial lot, but everything along River Drive right now would be 15 residential lots, and the area to the south of River Drive is planned to be platted in the future, so right now it'd be 15 residential lots. The next subdivision is Rolling Hills PUD. It's mainly R3. It's approximately 30 acres, and they have, I think, 10 to 12 R3 units planned for this subdivision. That is along State Avenue, yes.
Do you know offhand how many units, living units there are in that development, Mr.
I
Curtin?
don't.
Mr. Jackson, they had proposed roughly 320 units.
And how many of those do we expect to see this summer?
Depends on the sewer capacity, and we're still working out those details of how many permits we may be able to allow. We have a capacity issue to the northeast of the property, and we may be able to allow a building or two this year, but we're still analyzing at this point.
The next subdivision we've seen at the commission meetings in the past is the Dickinson Hills subdivision along the West Business Loop. This subdivision is 92 acres, mainly commercial development with some R3 planned, and we do have site plans that we're reviewing already for this subdivision.
There was a stormwater issue that favorably resolved.
Well, we had a favorable meeting, I think, if you can call an outside meeting when it's 20 below favorable, but we met, the developer had called a meeting and brought in many of the regulatory agencies with the Corps, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Game and Fish. We had a good meeting. I think they're moving forward with their plans to not only rechannel this drainage that runs through the middle of the property, but to put it in a box culvert, and we actually have a meeting with the developer tomorrow. Moving north of the interstate, the Westridge First Edition is essentially built out. There's a few stormwater improvements to complete in 2014, but the water, sewer, and streets are all in place. This is where the Menards is. We expect there to be quite a bit of build-out in the Westridge First Edition in 2014. And Westridge Second, we are trying to move our mouse around here. The Westridge Second subdivision, it's just immediately to the west of Westridge First. We have a lot of meetings going on with the developer on this one, but I think they have a final plat into the city right now. So this is, again, a residential subdivision with some commercial development in there, and it's roughly 100 acres. This is more difficult than it looks. The next subdivision is the Pinecrest subdivision. It's a mixed-use development, approximately 400 acres with quite a bit of commercial, some high-density residential. Again, we're at the final plat stage with the Pinecrest subdivision. Aaron, can you click on those for me? Thank you. The next subdivision is the S&B subdivision. This one is building out right now. These are the apartment buildings along State Avenue and just south of 21st Street. I think that's all R3 in the S&B subdivision. The next one is the Cook Meadows. We've built out Cook Meadows 1 through 4 as far as water, sewer, and streets. This is the entire build out for Cook Meadows 5th. I know they have some phasing plans that'll limit their work mainly to the east side of this subdivision, but the subdivision itself is approximately 300 acres. The next one is Cook Meadows 6th. This is kind of in the conceptual phase, but it's just to the south of Cook Meadows 5th and to the north of the Public Safety Center, which is our next project here. Public Safety Center is actually just going through plating right now. I think it's just been approved at the Planning Commission. It's a 9-acre site that's going to house the joint fire department and police department. And the final subdivision that I have on our list is the Prairie Creek subdivision. Again, it's a mixed-use subdivision. There's 37 R1 lots and 21 acres of commercial that'll mostly front State Avenue and 21st Street. So if I can zoom out, I think I can. This kind of paints a picture of the development projects that we're actively working on in Dickinson right now. So you can see there's quite a few of them. I had put in a memo to you that it was 8 developments and about 1,000 acres. Well, it's quite a bit more than that as I sat down and drew them all out. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Marshik. She's going to go through some of the CIP projects to really show how we're going to service all these projects and the 32 projects that you see on the CIP list, why we need those projects. And I think it'll all come together pretty well here.
Thank you. Aaron, could you click on 10th Avenue West? Thank you. 10th Avenue West is an urban roads project that we currently have under construction. We are getting that going. Meyer Construction was the low bidder on that project. 15th Street. We are working closely with all parties involved on this project to get the design going. We have a meeting on a weekly basis, and our hopes are to have biddable plans for the project out before the end of the month so that we can get that going this construction season. State Avenue. Plans are in design from 21st Street to 40th. The project does include preemptive signals at the entrance to the Public Safety Center, and we are currently in process of working on acquiring right-of-way along that project. The West Side 24-inch dedicated water main is the next project on the list. Those plans are completed, and the bid date is set for April 8th. The East Side water distribution, those plans are also completed, and Matt talked about the BNSF permit that we were waiting on to keep this project moving forward. That bid date with the receipt of those documents will also be April 8th. 21st Street West. This project is in design and includes procuring the needed appraisals and right-of-way acquisition along that project. And then we have 40th Street. Those plans are completed. The DOT drainage permit was brought to the Stark County Water Resource Board in February, and we are in process of acquiring right-of-way along that project also. Do you have any questions on those projects for me?
These are all projects that we would be actively working on.
That's our intent. And then Gary has some, Mr. Zaroff, that he'll touch on that incorporate in with these. Thank you.
Well, Commission, if we could click on the Public Works facility. That's been in construction for about a year now. Excuse me. That is approximately 85% complete. And along with the Public Works facility is the animal shelter, which we look at as about 90% complete. Last week they were putting in the millwork and cabinets, so it's coming along nicely. I was going to ask if you Commission wants another tour soon. I can arrange that. Let's go to the wastewater reclamation facility. That has also been under construction for probably a year and a half. We consider that about 86% complete. Along with that, currently we're looking at the reclaim booster station with that. And we don't have shown the reclaim line, but that was done by the Dakota Prairie project. Next will be the influent pump station. That connects the water reclamation to that main lift station. Currently, the influent pump station is also under construction, and if I can find it here, we're at about 50% complete. I think the pumps were delivered a couple weeks ago. That project has kind of been out of sight, but it is going along nicely, and minimal change orders in a good project. Next, as we continue on the route for sewer, is the West Lift Station project. That has been bid awarded, and they actually started construction last week. We had our first progress meeting last week also, and so that project will get going faster as the weather warms up. The next project is the West Gravity Sewer. That has also been bid and awarded. I think we're still working on document or contracts for that project, so that will get going as soon as weather also gets better. Then the next one is we included the West Sewer. That is the Dakota Prairie Lift Station, Highway 10 Lift Station, we also call it. The lift station itself has been bid and awarded and under construction. There was a pre-con meeting just over a week ago. So the pump station, lift station, which is kind of in the middle of the line there, is starting construction. The sewer line itself has not been bid, but that is being built by the Dakota Prairie. Lift station 12, we are getting ready to getting design finalized. That is going to be bid the end of April. And that includes the lift station on 15th and the force main all the way under, let me get the pointer here, south of the interstate to the West Gravity sewer. It also includes this portion through Prairie Creek up to 21st and State. That is included on that project, and like I said, that will be bid the end of April. Lift Station 14, we're starting design on that, and there's no bid date on that yet. The finished water pump station is out for bid. That's a joint project between the Southwest Water and the city of Dickinson. The bid opening will be April 9th. We have about a 51% cost share on that project, and so that will start construction soon also. Got a couple more here. The West 1 million gallon water reservoir, that has not been tasked yet. Excuse me, that has been tasked. We are going to, see, I'm getting confused now. We have a bid date of April 8th for the West 1 million gallon tank. And all the sewer projects are part of the SRF loan, as you can see in the spreadsheet that Mr. Kessel gave you. So that's all in all the sewer projects are that. The finished water pump station, the West 1 million gallon tank, and the booster stations are part of the money from the Water Commission. So those are the projects that the boosters in the east side are the ones that the Water Commission has helped us out tremendously in getting those going. So the River Drive booster is on the south part of town by KLD subdivision, and you can see where it sits in that area. State Avenue booster will help the State Avenue project along with the public safety facility and Cook Meadow Hills area. That's needed there. And we are also shy of water storage, so the east side water tank would be the next one. We're looking at that by the Public Works facility, and that has not been tasked yet. But we also have that on our project list. Is there any questions on those projects? You can see how they all are, everything's starting to tie together. Next, Engineer Kubis has the next DOT projects.
Thank you. The next project we had talked about quite a bit was the State Avenue Railroad Bridge. After the last meeting, we had made some decisions or recommendations, passed those along to the DOT. That project is moving along again in the design phase. And right now, the bid date isn't locked down, but it would be either late summer, early fall bid letting to begin some construction this year, hopefully, and have a completion date in 2015. The final two projects on the west side of town are the interim bypass. Some of this has been built already. Much of what will, serve the developing areas of Dickinson was that first mile up to 21st Street, which we're calling 30th Avenue now. And then the DOT has still under contract the remaining 4 miles that were graded. Quite a bit of work was done last year, and that'll get gravelled and paved this year. I believe it has a completion date around August of this year. And then the last DOT project that we're involved with, we talked about earlier in the meeting, is the ultimate truck bypass route here that extends I-94 at 116th over to Highway 22. Right now, the project that's been bid that we've been talking about is essentially this area here, where they'll build a new interchange and tie in to 116th. The remainder of the bypass hasn't been designed yet. So if we can zoom over and take a look at all these, I think I can probably grab that.
Mr. Kubis, Empire Road wasn't clicked yet.
Oh, I think I can get it. Maybe you can get that one too, Aaron. Yeah, Empire Road, sorry. Another street project that we had recently bid. We're working out some of the contractual agreements with the hospital. We bid this project in conjunction with a private street that will service the Hospital Acres subdivision. So, Aaron, if you can zoom out and take a look at everything in whole here, the purple again are all the street projects or road projects. The blue is the water projects. The orange or brown are the sewer projects, and then all the other colors are subdivisions. So we have quite a bit of work here, but if you remember earlier in the evening, Mr. Zuroff talked, or Mr. Coulter talked about $1 million mill and overlay project and a $2 million chip seal project. And we don't show on here that Mid-Continent Communications is going to come and blanket the city with cable this year. It all belabors the point that we need a lot of inspection and locating services to accomplish all this work. So there's a lot of work to be done. We hope to get just as much of it done as we can in 2015 or in 2014, understanding that some of this might get pushed into 2015, but we have a really, really aggressive year. And with all the construction, like we talked about, the public information officer, we think it's just going to be critical to get updates on everything you see here out to the public in a real timely fashion. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Can we go back to Coke Meadows?
No. Just kidding. Again, the one to the north is what we're now calling Cook Meadow Hills 5th edition. That's the entire plat. They've talked about a smaller plan for construction this year. That would be along State Avenue. Do you have a question on it?
Well, I'm questioning if I get so many complaints regarding drainage, street lights, streets. Is he taking care of those projects or not?
In the subdivisions, the 1 through 4th? Yeah.
I say Coke, you say Cook, whatever.
We are meeting with Mr. Cook regularly. We've just had some correspondence to start formalizing our DA for these new developments, which will absolutely include, I think, really a lot of the discussion that was held at Planning Commission last July about cleaning some of the things up. We've worked out the details, I think, on some of the repairs to the streets and the infrastructure and the settling issues that everyone's noticed. But we absolutely intend to have the drainage issues corrected. He's working through the FEMA process right now because to do what we need to do to fix the drainage problems, we can clean up the drainage problems, but to fix it required some work with FEMA that he needed to get some paperwork in through FEMA. So that's moving along now. It'll involve the State Avenue project, needs to be a part of that fix with the floodway or the floodplain. So it's a pretty complex problem that we're working through with the developer, and it involves at least a couple of our projects that we have shown here.
Okay, good. We want to make sure we take care of those.
Mm-hmm. If there's nothing else, I think we intend to use this and to keep updating it. And again, when you take a look at it in its whole, it's a whole heck of a lot of work for this year. So.
Thank you, presenters, for presenting this. I think it's an excellent tool, and it helps educate us as commissioners. It certainly, I think, helps with the public. I think we could even take this presentation and, along with maybe some good handouts regarding the financing, use it with key legislators, use it with the executive branch. It really tells a great story. And, you know, if we used it with, say, some of these outside key people, I mean, if we even went back to the beginning, I know you took the developments that we're just working on now, but we've completed several developments since the impact started, and so we could really show kind of the where we've been the last 2 or 3 years and where we're at today and probably where we're going tomorrow. And, you know, when you see that big overview and you know what's going on out there with the refinery, the transload facility, those things, you can really see how this does tie together, that there's been good planning, and looks to me like some pretty good engineering too here, so that's very helpful.
Well, it's an excellent point. Now, this was really our first run-through on showing this, but a couple of those street projects, 10th Avenue West and 40th Street in particular, are really playing catch-up for some subdivisions that have happened already to provide them good access and better water and sewer services. So we can show some of those previously platted, previously developed subdivisions, I think, to paint an even clearer picture of what's all going on.
Yeah, and it isn't like some of our key leaders need to see this for every city, but if we can show them, say, this is what's going on in Dickinson, we can show you graphically in about a 30-minute presentation of really what the impact is. And it's not just happening in Dickinson, it's happening in Williston and Watford City and many of our other smaller communities within the main Bakken area. I think it's very effective. So good job. Any other comments? Okay, well then we're going to go to Public Works, and item A there is a proposed fee resolution regarding sewer rates, and Attorney Coling and Public Works Director Zuroff are going to present this item. So,
Mr. President, Commissioners, if you recall to the last City Commission meeting, there was a presentation by our wastewater consultant from Apex, Carla Olson, and she has done some investigation. Apex as a consultant has done some investigation into our sewer rates. We are, as you see from the previous presentation, bringing on a great deal of physical infrastructure in our wastewater system. Everything from the water reclamation facility to the pump stations and sewer lines. That's a substantial amount of infrastructure, and that requires a substantial amount of debt, most of that through the state revolving loan fund. And in order to provide for that debt, we have looked into our existing utility rates. Currently, city customers, residential customers pay a $7.50 per month base charge for city sewer service. And then there's also a usage rate that is attached to that as well of $2 per 1,000 gallons per month. In order to have our base rate cover the potential debt service for all of these projects, our base rates are going to have to increase. As Ms. Olson presented to you last meeting, her proposal was for an initial base rate increase to $11 per month for a residential user. Commercial base rates would also go up as they tend to consume more water and thus use more of our wastewater system. We also are anticipating having sewer customers, wastewater customers outside of city limits. Dakota Prairie Refinery is already contracted with the city to have the wastewater reclamation facility provide sewer service to the refinery. We're also working with the city of South Hart to provide sewer service to that community, and have received inquiries from others outside of city limits also to connect to the city's wastewater system. So we have attempted to provide for an equitable rate structure for those communities and those other entities as well. And as an initial tack at this, we have proposed sewer utility rates at 10% more for sewer customers outside of city limits as for what our customers inside of city limits would pay. The rate schedule is in a resolution before you. We'd be happy to entertain any questions. Mr. Zuroff may wish to make some comments on the proposed rates as well, and I'll let him comment if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. I don't have a lot to add, but I think the presentation done by Apex was well done. We tried to keep all the debt service and capital on the base rate, not the we kept the $2 a thousand, or the rate for 1,000 of wastewater as O&M. We hope to have additional revenues with future sale of reclaimed water. We hope that happens, and so I think we need to look at the payback of the SRF, and this is our first shot at it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zuroff. Mr. Colling, we'll open it up now for comments and questions by commissioners.
I just have one regarding South Hart. Now that they've annexed that industrial area, is that going to make a difference? I know they have to pay the fees, that's for sure, but it's not going to be an overload of what we predicted, is it?
An overload for capacity?
Right.
No, it shouldn't be. The water reclamation facility can handle a good amount. I guess the 24-inch line from 116 into the West Lift Station is designed to handle that whole drainage way for sewer. I guess the one thing for an industrial would be the concentrations would be more of a concern than the quantities. But we do have to look at that. Anything outside that drainage area that was originally designed, how much can we take into that and accept? I think that's something we'll need to look at. But I think that little bit that they're looking at annexing isn't going to be an issue.
If I could additionally, Commissioner Dukart, in our agreement, we would cap South Hart at a certain level. So they can apply that level however they desire, residential, industrial, commercial, but we do have a cap on them currently. So they would have to fall within that cap. And we did oversize the pipe, as Public Works Director Zuroff mentioned, to accommodate.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, I know that when I watched the Apex presentation, the one thing that leaped out at me a little bit was the the 10% differential for outside city limits. You know, I know right now we and they being Apex, are making a lot of assumptions. We're trying to get ahead of this, and that's as it should be. But I just wonder if the 10% differential is enough. You know, we have a lot of, the enterprise funds don't pay for everything that happens in the sewer world, most of it, of course. And I understand that we assign an administrative charge to the sewer enterprise, water and sewer enterprise. But I'm just really questioning that. I suppose what we can do is do this and maybe revisit it in a year, and we'll be a little bit smarter, maybe. We'll know how much demand we're going to get or contribution we're going to get from outside of city limits a little bit better. But that's the one thing that's giving me a little bit pause. Otherwise, I think we should move forward.
Mr. Jackson, do other larger cities offer these services outside and then have a charge for them, or?
I know there are some, but I'm not familiar with the detail of what they do. I know Fargo does some. Fargo does quite a bit, actually.
Mr. Zaroff, you know the answer?
Maybe
Mr. Kessel.
Yeah.
Mr. Kessel can answer that.
As part of the discussion with Apex in collecting these rates, it is atypical to have such a low rate for exterior, I'll call them, or outside city limit
10% is a low rate.
It's a very low rate. In comparison, there are several existing contracts with North Dakota cities that are as high as 50% higher. So this is atypical, and the reason that it was presented as it was is we were very sensitive to South Hart and that customer base. They are going from a lagoon-based system to a mechanical treatment plant, and although our rates are right in line with mechanical treatment plants, they are higher than a lagoon rate because of the type of treatment that we can offer. So they are going to experience a rather large increase, but that's why we kept it low. I certainly agree with Commissioner Jackson that this is atypical of most agreements in North Dakota or around our area.
Well, I'm thinking that if it is atypical and we're starting low, typically it's been my experience that it's hard to raise your prices. It's easier to reduce them. If 10% is too low, maybe we ought to start higher. Yeah, I'm concerned about South Hart, and I'm wondering if in general I'll just pick a number, say we start at 20% instead of 10, could we still set aside South Hart, line item South Hart in a sense, and give them a 10% increase? And the reason I say that is, or a 10% differential, is I think it would be good public policy to eliminate or reduce the use of lagoons in our area. And if we can help encourage South Hart to either eliminate their lagoons or reduce the use of them, I think that would be a good thing. So I think Mr. Jackson raised a very valid question, and if indeed we are too low, I'd rather correct that now than a year from now.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend to know what the right number is. I think South Hart does deserve a special look. And maybe another way to approach South Hart is to do this for now and set an increase for a year or two down the road with South Hart. Just, in other words, delay bringing them to that higher rate. But whatever, overall, I just think it's something we should look at.
Mr. President, we can certainly look at doing that. I should mention the rates that are reflected here are basically phase one of the presentation that Apex had given you last meeting, because there is some infrastructure with respect to our wastewater system that will come online in 2015. There are some more that will come online later on, and the recommendation at that point would be to do another step up in our base rates up to basically around $14 for a typical residential unit for an in-city rate. as Mr. Kessel and I have talked about a little bit here, I think one of the things we will keep in mind is our existing contract with Dakota Prairie Refinery calls for us to charge a customary rate to the refinery. And what we talked about with them at the time we were negotiating the agreement is that we anticipated having a rate for inside city limits and a separate rate for outside city limits. And what they asked at that time is simply that they would be charged a customary rate, whatever that rate would be. And I think they probably have some flexibility in there, but I don't think they're going to be interested in bankrolling or subsidizing service to other areas outside the city limits. And will deserve some consideration and some fairness in the rate that we charge, both to the refinery and to other industrial users outside of city limits.
There's another unknown here, but it's a significant unknown, and that is depending upon our capital needs and the level of impact funding that we get from the legislature. In future years, it may be possible to take some of the impact money and apply it towards debt repayment, which means that our users don't have to pay the full load of the financing. And Mr. Kessel and I had a chance to meet with two of our local legislators probably about a month ago, and they asked us, what do you think your financial needs will be from the 2015 legislature? And we not only included in we told them $120 million, okay, and what's included in there in round numbers is $100 million for capital projects and $20 million for principal and interest repayment on all of our debt. So if it may not be quite fair to ask the state to pay all of our principal and interest, but it's also not quite fair to ask our citizens to pay all that when it's impact. So there's a happy medium in there someplace. That's yet to be determined. So I agree we need to increase our rates now. We may not, when it comes to a second and third phase, we may or may not have to increase them as much as Mrs. Olson was referring to in her presentation, because she was assuming that there would be no aid from the state for principal and interest payments. So that, I think, is still a possibility and certainly a legitimate request on our part that there be some funding there for that. Also, I mentioned I met with the governor and his staff just a week ago or so, and in response to the same question, what do you need out of the 2015 legislature? I told them again $120 million and showed them the breakout, how much of that was capital projects and how much was debt and debt service. So that's a factor. But Mr. Jackson.
I'm in part of the conversations with South Hart, but has it been explored that perhaps South Hart would apply for and receive some oil impact funding to possibly buy down these numbers?
Mr. Jackson, South Hart has received oil impact dollars to construct the pipeline from their community limits to the...
I understand that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But for the rest of what part of this we would see as capital repayment?
Something on our wastewater treatment center or something of that nature. Yeah, they have not applied for grants that I know of related to that.
Well, I guess, like I said, Mr. Jackson, I agree with the point you raised. If we are going to end up with a higher rate than 10% or a higher differential than 10%, I'd rather start that way now than a year from now. But if we could exempt South Hart from that and give them the 10% rate or 10% differential, I'd sure like to see that done.
President Johnson and Commission, I just want to remind everyone that the 10% is only on the base rate and not on the consumption.
Right.
Yeah, that's the other thing we need to remember. So the differential isn't going to be 10%.
No.
It'll be something less than that.
So I like I said, I think you raised an excellent point, and I'd rather deal with it now than a year from now. So if I remember from the memo correctly, you were looking at making this effective July 1st? Did I remember that correctly?
Mr. President, I think we would look at making these rates effective as of the date the commission would agree to them. There is a need to build up somewhat of a reserve as we look at the additional operation and maintenance costs for some of these systems. I'm not sure that the resolution right now is in a form that we would recommend the commission adopt it tonight,
Yeah.
but we'd like to take your comments and be able to bring it back to you for future implementation.
Well, I think just so everybody's clear, the city will service its debt, which means that, you will apply your enterprise funds to that, but if they're not sufficient to service the debt, then we'll go to our oil impact funds and we will spend those first before we spend them on new capital projects, So the debt service becomes a priority. And when we, if we get fully loaned out between the SRF fund, the Wells Fargo bond that we acted on earlier, and the line of credit that we're in discussions with American Bank Center on, we will have annual debt service of somewhere between $18 and $20 million per year. No, per biennium. Yeah. Between 9 and 10 per year. So, whether there's enough money in the enterprise funds or not, we'll pay our debts, but we'll just we'll allocate impact funds. That'll be our only option to the enterprise funds. Well, why don't we leave it at this? Mr. Colling says maybe it's best not to act on this tonight. You've heard some of our comments. I would encourage commissioners, as you reflect on this more, share your comments with Mr. Colling and Mr. Kessel, and you come back with another resolution. Also, I would hope that from the time we actually act on this till the time we implement it, there is, a little bit of, well, more than a little bit of time, so we make it clear to the public what's coming their way, and they have a chance to think about it and weigh in on it too. So if the base rate increased for our residential customers, I think in the memo there was a number that you had an estimate of what you thought it would cost the average user. Can't remember if it was an annual basis or a monthly basis. No.
Mr. President, the anticipated increase would be $3.50 per month.
$3.50. So that's, what is that? $42 a year. Yeah. So it's okay. There will be a bigger increase on commercial users.
Yes, that's correct. And the resolution also has a sewer access charge in there as well that we would begin implementing. We do have a sewer access charge now, or connection fee that's about $250. And the numbers that are in this resolution for connection fees are substantially more than that.
Go up substantially, and Mrs. Olson presented that in her presentation, and I might be wrong on this, but I seem to recall that her numbers were more in line with other major communities than what our current numbers are. Yeah. Mr. Steiner, do you have a comment?
Nope, I would agree that we ought to take another look at it.
Okay. Anything else on that item? Okay, we'll go to community development. Mr. Curtin, you want to take us through your items?
First item on the agenda, Mr. President, is the development agreement for Prairie Creek. I'll defer that to Attorney Colleen, who did the heavy lifting on that project.
Mr. President, Commissioners, the development agreement before you is for the Prairie Creek subdivision, which you saw in the previous presentation by Mr. Kubis. This is a subdivision located to the east of State Avenue North, between 21st Street and basically 15th Street. This development agreement is substantially in the form that we have used for other subdivisions around the city. One change to this development agreement from what you have seen before has to do with the construction of the trunk line gravity sewer through Prairie Creek subdivision. We have elected to add that trunk gravity sewer to our lift station number 12 project. That will allow us to connect the sewer from lift station 12 all the way up to the corner of State Avenue and 21st, which will then allow sewer service to connect up to our planned public works facility, our public safety center rather. We have negotiated with the developer to pay the reasonable and fair share of that trunk sewer line. The developer, if he was only constructing his own property, would need to construct about an 8-inch sewer line. It will be a 24-inch sewer line that will go in. So the city will pay for the upsize, and the developer will pay for his share of that trunk line. The developer's share of that trunk line rounds out to about $83,000. City staff would recommend approval of the development agreement, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Colleen. Are there any comments or questions? It doesn't really pertain to the development agreement, but this piece of land is sat there undeveloped, and it's pretty obvious that it should be developed. So is this, if this development agreement is approved, are we likely to see construction activity then this year?
I would say so. I've talked to the developer on several times, as Attorney Colleen has as well. They're looking at working on the residential portion, the one that's along the creek, the first part of it, and then also the commercial portion at the southeast corner. They have a future restaurant tenant that has been talking to me well over a year. So if all goes well, then that commercial piece, the small section, small piece that's roughly 5 acres, would be developed this year, along with potentially some of the apartments as well.
I'm mostly interested on the residential side. I know we need more residential lots.
And this is definitely one at 82 lots that you have for it. We've been waiting on this. Obviously, we want the development agreement to be addressed for us to bring up utilities, but as Commissioner Dukart has mentioned several times, to have additional single-family lots in the market would be advantageous for the single-family development, and this is one of our bigger developments, so I would anticipate this to move forward this year.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else by commissioners?
No, we're just building all the way around it. There's this big open hill. It would be nice to have it developed.
We will be very happy to have this project move forward.
Good, thank you.
Is there anything else?
I'll move we approve the development agreement for Prairie Creek.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Go to
Mr.
item
President,
D.
the next item is the final plat for Clear Creek, the one that I just got through talking about, so I won't belabor the facts on that one. City staff and the Planning Commission recommend approval.
Okay. This is a resolution. I've lost track of the numbers, Mr. Colling.
Mr. President, this will be Resolution 18-2014.
Okay. Any comments and questions regarding the resolution that's in your binder? Is there a motion regarding Resolution 18-2014?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Mr. President, the next item is a development agreement for the Lamont Second Edition. As I mentioned earlier, that Attorney Colling has been working with developers, and I'll let him present that.
Mr. President, Commissioners, this is a development agreement for the Lamont Second Edition. The property is located to the north of 14th Street East, basically in back of the Hampton Inn. You may recall some discussion on this proposed subdivision at the last commission meeting, specifically with request to, or with, in response to the request of the developer for a special assessment district on 2nd Avenue West. We have not committed, obviously, to the establishment of a district. It was not your decision as a commission, your consensus as a commission to have any sort of development impact fee district for 2nd Avenue. We have communicated that to the developer. They would like to continue discussions regarding that matter, and this agreement does allow for us to continue to discuss potential financing vehicles or funding vehicles for 2nd Avenue West. Other than that, the proposed development agreement is substantially in the form that we have used for other developments within the city, and city staff would recommend approval. Be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Any comments or questions? Not, is there a motion regarding the agreement?
Move to approve, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Mr. President, the last item I have tonight is the building permit report for February 2014. February was a very surprising month. We were pleasantly surprised, and I'm still very optimistic for this year. Just to run down some numbers for you. Commercial structures were ahead of last year, even though the number is very small. We had 3 compared to 0 at this time last year. Single-family residents were ahead of where we were last year. We had 18 permits issued as of date compared to 8, a 56% increase. Total permits issued, we've almost doubled the amount from last year, from 25 to 13. We are slightly below the total number of housing units, though, and that's indicative of several of the projects last year were larger apartment complexes that added to the dwelling unit total, but we're still at 162 compared to 176 of last year. I think a key figure is the building permit values. As to date, we're at 35.8 million compared to 21.5 of last year, a 40% increase. And probably one that's very important is the fees remitted to the city on the second page. Just for the first 2 months of the year, we're at 28% of the budget, at 189,000 compared to 157,000. So for 2 months, we're well on our start for meeting our budget for this year and even surpassing what our projected figures are. So I do feel very optimistic about this year. If we can get some more single-family lots on, that this year will be a very good year, depending on the weather, obviously, in spring and summer. With that, I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Creton. Comments or questions? All right, we'll move to item 9 then. Any reports or comments by city commissioners?
One very quick one, Mr. President. I think it was Mr. Kessel earlier this evening talked about, or was it you, talked about getting some of the 2015 projects moving and,
Right.
and getting engineering work
Yep.
done. And that's really good. It's really good to hear that we're doing that. I don't think we've prioritized those projects yet for 2015, most of them. And I sure hope that this summer sometime we can have some kind of a session that we really look at those so we can scrutinize them and do some prioritization. I think we have to be more careful with that in the future.
Other comments? Thank you, Mr. Jackson. If there's anyone from the public that would like to address the commission, you may do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public?
President, Commissioners. My name is Chris Williamson. I'm Senior Director of Operations for Spartan Nash. I originally came here tonight to observe the on-sale, off-sale liquor license. I want to commend you on your forward thinking in that regard. As you may know, Spartan Nash recently, within the last few months, came in and we purchased the 2 Dan stores that are located in Dickinson. We'll be doing extensive remodels of those 2 locations starting in May. We are also going to build a ground-up store, excuse me, in the Westridge development, and I want to let you know that that store will be, in parallel with stores that you would see in areas like Denver, Chicago, Minneapolis. It will offer the absolute best in meats, produce, fresh seafood, and it's very much what the community of Dickinson deserves. The reason I came up here, I sat quietly in the back and observed, this group. It is part of my job. I get to go and travel to many areas throughout the country, whether it be Rapid City, Fargo, in Nebraska. We have just shy of 200 stores in 7 states. The reason I came up here tonight was to let you know how absolutely impressed I am with this group. Like I said, I sit through a lot of these, and you have quite an opportunity that has been placed before you, and quite an obligation to your community that has been placed upon you. The forward thinking and the precision in which I've seen this group conduct themselves tonight is commendable. And that's really all I had to say, is that how greatly and truly impressed I've been during this meeting with all of you. So thanks. Have a great evening.
Well, Mr. Williamson, if you want to carry on a little longer, that'd be just fine.
No, I don't want to go too far, but no, you guys you really have it together. And I think there's some great things that are going to happen for this community.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you being here, and we are looking forward to that new ground-up store. I've heard a lot of comments, as I'm sure my fellow commissioners have, over the last several years, that how nice it would be to have a facility like the one you're planning to build. So we're real encouraged to hear that, and we look forward to its grand opening.
Yeah, I would encourage, I won't take up much more of your time, but I would encourage you, if you have the chance, to go on and look up familyfreshmarket.com. That's our store. What is great about our locations is that it's not just about a grocery store. We have a tremendous amount of health and wellness that's incorporated. It's about consumer education. We do a tremendous amount of work with the schools. So I think with the influx of residents that you have coming to the community, to have a solid partner with the schools in regards to health and wellness, consumer education, I think will go hand in hand with what you have going on here. So we are just as excited.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
Is there anybody else that would like to address the commission?
Mr. President, I just want to mention that I had sent out a notice to to department heads that we are having a meeting coming up on Tuesday, March 25th at 2 o'clock in the City Council chambers, just to discuss their new store, and to have different department heads there for them to be able to discuss and ask any questions that they do have. So if you wanted to attend, you're more than welcome as well.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. President, Commissioners. My name is Nancy Koslecki, and my husband and I, John, own Vintage Liquors. And I just wanted to go back to something. 2 weeks ago, I was at the meeting, and this week's non-timetable agenda 4G was cut short because Mr. Kessler had to leave to attend a meeting in South Hart, I believe with Apex. And it was then moved that this would be brought to this week's meeting. And it was also stated that would probably have public discussion yet. I'm thinking it might be possible there was maybe an oversight, because normally, Mr. President, you ask if anyone from the public has any question or comments before the vote is taken. This evening you didn't do that, and there were some people present that had to leave for other reasons, and it sounded as if when you were asking if there were any questions or comments, it was directed towards the commissioners. And so I was just wondering if it would be possible I do have a couple of questions regarding that topic, if we could revisit it. I know you've already voted on resolution number 17, but I just had a few questions and comments I wonder if we could revisit.
Sure, you can go ahead and make any comments or questions. In regard to the procedure that we took tonight, generally ordinances, we ask for public comment. Resolutions, we generally don't.
So then is this going from a resolution to an ordinance then?
No, the resolution authorizing the city to go ahead and issue another on and off sale license doesn't require an ordinance.
Okay, I was just trying to,
But I mean, I just want to explain the process a little bit, but you go ahead and make your comments.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that for me,
yeah.
because I was not aware that that it wasn't open for public on a resolution, so thank you for clarifying that.
Generally speaking, a resolution you don't ask for public input on.
Okay, well, the questions I had basically was, there was a license issued a year ago to Cashwise Foods, and it's been within the last year, and I'm just curious where they stand with that, because that was issued, and I believe there's part of the ordinances that has to be used within a year, and as to my knowledge, that one has yet not been utilized, and I'm wondering if they've asked for an extension?
Yes, they have. We'll let Mr. Kessel and Mr. Colling address that.
Thank you. The ordinance does allow myself to do a extension of that license, of which they did request it. I did grant that extension. They also asked for an additional extension. Our ordinance did not require or did not allow for any additional extensions. The City Commission was brought in on the situation. They did change the ordinance to allow a second extension, and that has been granted as well. They expect to start construction on that facility this spring, and they've told us consistently that they'll be done by the October-ish timeframe. So we hope that our extension that we provided would, as long as it opens around that timeframe, they'd fall within the extension period.
Okay.
And the reason we gave them that extension is because the land that they purchased was not a bit ready to be built on, because we did have issues with water and sewer and,
okay,
right?
Yeah. And as Mr. Kessel pointed out, that was an ordinance change. It went through the 2 readings, and the public was invited to comment on those.
Okay. And I think when that happened, I was out of town, so I appreciate the clarification on that. The only other question I have is, when you are opening up these bids for $185,000, and someone comes in and places that bid, if that's the minimum starting bid, if in 4 years my husband and I decide to sell our liquor store, someone comes in and approaches us, at what I'm trying to clarify in my mind, if you're asking $185,000 for a new license and one is going to change hands, then is there a specific ordinance that I can refer to see how that is directed towards us?
No, that's a private transaction. Whenever someone sells their business or sells their license, I think all that's, and Mr. Colling will correct me if I'm wrong, I think all that's required there is, once you, as a willing seller, have a willing buyer, then the city does have an opportunity to approve the buyer. I mean, the buyer has to meet whatever requirements the city has, and we have a chance to approve that, but you set your own price. I mean, so if you can sell your license for $285,000 or your business, that's fine.
Okay, and I was just curious because it had been brought to, there's been some talk that a couple of the liquor stores in town are considering selling their licenses. So I was just wondering if before another bid process was started, if whoever's considering buying a license had actually checked to see if any of those licenses were for sale.
We never know if someone that's in the market, if they've done that or not. That's certainly an option, and our concern is we've kind of set, I think it's 3,000 increase in population as the setting the stage for the next liquor license. And I think our requirement here, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had licenses for 18,000 people, and Spartan Nash raised the issue that we think you're more than 18,000 people, and we would certainly be interested in bidding for a license. And I think if you were here earlier this evening, you heard Mr. Kessel and Mr. Curtan say that in their view we're 24,000 people. That certainly surpasses then the 21,000 hurdle, and we can issue another license there. So as our city grows, and since you issue licenses, I think we have a reasonable setup that protects the value of the existing license holders. You know, if someone came in here a couple years ago and paid $190,000 for a license, they'd like to be able to think that if they had to sell it, they could at least get their money back up.
Okay, and then I just had one other question, and I don't remember if it was Mr. Colling or Mr. Kessel had talked about the landfill had increased tonnage of 30%. The water consumption was up 34% increase, and the building permits, he was throwing all that out as trying to determine what the population was. My question is, of those ratios that you've given us, how do you know what percentage of that is based on events that are seasonal? If they bring in some tournaments or they bring in some kind of activity that's, you know, if it's only here for a week or a weekend and we see a lot of people coming into town, staying in the hotels, staying with relatives, is there any way to account for that increase being fluctuating due to seasonal?
What we
not
did is,
necessarily permanent residents.
excuse me, we did use 2010 numbers and compared those to 2013 for the most part. In those 2010 numbers would be included the same kind of figures that you're speaking of. So in terms of water consumption and in terms of landfill tonnage, those may have even increased, I suppose, a little bit because of the additional hotels. But in terms of the building permit numbers, I think those are quite clear, and I don't think the type of influx that you're speaking to would affect those at all. And we're in speaking to Mr. Corton, he's the one who made the predictions on the building permit. He informed me that he was quite conservative because we didn't even include, the census was taken in about April of 10, and we didn't include the remaining 2010 in those original numbers. So there was 6 months of construction that didn't get included, and we're using an occupancy of 2.6% or 2.6 per household. So that means every other household has a child. And I'm not sure if that's typical or not. I would think that the number is a little higher than that myself, based on what the school is seeing. So I think we were very conservative in our estimates. If that type of activity was happening in 2010, it continues to happen in 2013. I can't attribute, in terms of water consumption, a figure that would be due to influx of temporary residents.
Okay, and the other thing I just wanted to kind of address, and it's just some numbers, and I didn't know if the commission was had some of the information, and some of the information that that I'm getting is from the Coalition of Safe Communities from their 12 years that they've been funded, and this was based on a 2012 estimated population in the city of Dickinson being 19,697 people. There were 52 licensed establishments in the county, in Stark County, and 13 of those 52 were outside of Dickinson. 39 of the licensed establishments were in Dickinson. That included the bars, restaurants, the off-sale, and clubs. And that put the current density of alcohol establishments in the city of Dickinson, one establishment for 500 per every 574 people, included of all ages. It also said that you have to add 14 licenses for beer, which brought it to 53, which changes the density of one establishment for every 372 people. And if the population were to increase to an estimated 25,000, instead of the 19,697 they based it off of, that establishment would change to one for every 472 people. And so I just thought it was some interesting numbers that I had come across, and I wasn't sure if you were aware, but There was also a number that had been updated on that information initially, and it stated that that Dickinson was 83.8% of the licensed alcohol retailers in Stark County and 73.5% of the population, meaning that Dickinson's alcohol outlet density is overrepresented in Stark County. So that's why I brought it up, just because it's, I guess as a liquor store owner, I would like to, obviously we have a lot of time and money invested and effort in our store, and we try to, make sure that we are presenting a clean environment. But at the same time, I only sell liquor. I don't sell clothes, and I don't sell groceries, and I don't sell tires. So it's just something that when these come up and we watch it, it's just a concern, because everyone feels it across the bottom line, whether it's Walmart or any of the potential stores coming online. And so it's just a concern, and I appreciate your time. And I also want to commend you. I've been listening to, if I can't make the meetings, I watch them on TV. And I listen to all the reports, and after you sit here for all these hours and listen to all of these numbers and all of these figures and the growth in the city, I don't know, I commend every one of you, because it's a very a daunting task, and you're doing a wonderful job. And as a citizen who was born and raised here, I left and came back. I chose to raise my family here. I'm really proud of the direction our city is going, and I just want to commend you all for doing such a wonderful job, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Just a minute, Nancy. I was going to tell you how the banks tell you when you're ready to sell your property, unless you have a cash buyer, the banks go by what the value the city puts on the liquor license. In the past, it used to be $150, but then when we sold the last liquor license for $185, that's what they put on, and then your building, of course, is extra.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that information. If anybody wants to buy a liquor store, just let me know. Thank you.
We charge for commercials now. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to address the commission? Not, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have the motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries. We're